The bus groaned to a stop at the edge of Black Hollow, like it was protesting the destination itself. Clara Boone was the only passenger who stood, the only one getting off. Through the dirt-streaked window, she could see the town sprawled against the mountain base, a collection of buildings that looked more like they'd been thrown together than built. All weathered wood and rusted metal roofs that caught the late afternoon sun in dull, defeated flashes. The driver, a thin man with yellowed teeth and a face that suggested he'd seen too many years of this same route, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You sure about this, miss?" Clara pulled her worn duffel from the overhead rack. It wasn't heavy. Everything she owned fit inside with room to spare. That was what happened when you left everything behind. When you ran. "I'm sure," she said. The driver made a sound that wasn't quite agreement. "Ain't much here for—" He trailed off, but Clara knew how that sentence ended. She'd heard variations of it her whole life. "Ain't much here for someone like you." The door hissed open. September wind hit her face, carrying the smell of pine and dust and something else, something sharp and unfriendly. The altitude stole her breath for a moment. 8,000 feet, the sign outside town claimed. She'd never been this high before. Her boots hit dirt. The bus pulled away before she'd even cleared the steps, engine rattling like loose bones in a box. Within seconds, it was gone, leaving only a cloud of dust that hung in the thin air before settling slowly back to earth. Clara stood there, duffel at her feet, and took in Black Hollow properly. Main Street ran maybe 4 blocks before giving up entirely. A general store with bars on the windows. A diner with a faded sign that read, "Marlene's, Estan 1967. A post office smaller than most people's bedrooms. A bar called The Ridge that looked like it had been standing since before electricity reached this far into the mountains. And everywhere, on porches, in doorways, leaning against truck beds, people. All of them staring at her. She was used to stares, had been getting them since middle school, when her body decided to expand in directions that made other kids cruel and adults uncomfortable. By high school, she'd learned to move through the world like she was apologizing for taking up space. By her 20s, she'd stopped apologizing but never stopped noticing the looks. A woman in her late 50s emerged from the general store, wiping her hands on an apron. She had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the mountain, sharp, weathered, unimpressed. "You lost?" the woman called out. Clara picked up her duffel. "Looking for work." That got a reaction. Not a good one. A man sitting on a bench outside the post office actually laughed. A short, sharp bark that carried across the empty street. "Work," the woman repeated, like Clara had said something in a foreign language. "Doing what?" "Whatever needs doing." The woman's eyes traveled the length of Clara's body with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock. Clara felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her face neutral. Getting angry wouldn't help. Getting angry never helped. "You got experience with ranch work?" the woman asked. "I can learn." "Can you?" The woman's tone suggested she had serious doubts about that. "Altitude's different up here. Work's hard, winter's harder. Most folks from flat country don't last a season." Clara shifted her weight. Her feet hurt. She'd been on that bus for 14 hours, and before that, she'd been on another bus. And before that, she'd been running. Always running. "I'm not most folks," Clara said. The man on the bench laughed again. "That's for damn sure." Heat crept up Clara's neck, but she didn't turn to look at him. Didn't give him the satisfaction. The woman studied her a moment longer, then shrugged. "Marlene's is hiring. Kitchen work. Minimum wage." "I'll take it." "You ain't even asked what the hours are." "Doesn't matter." That seemed to surprise the woman, just slightly. Her expression softened by maybe a degree. Not warmth exactly, but something closer to it than outright hostility. "Go on in. Tell Marlene that Ruth sent you. She'll probably say no, but—" The woman, Ruth, gestured vaguely, like the rest of that sentence didn't need saying. Clara nodded her thanks and headed toward the diner. Behind her, she heard voices pick up again, low and speculative. She didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. The diner smelled like old grease and cigarettes, even though smoking had probably been banned years ago. The smell just lived in the walls now, permanent as the foundation. A handful of customers sat scattered across the booths, all men, all wearing variations of the same uniform, worn jeans, work boots, shirts with pearl snaps, hats stained with sweat and time. Every one of them looked up when she walked in. A woman in her 60s stood behind the counter, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun that looked like it physically hurt. She had a face that might have been pretty once, before life and altitude and probably 1,000 disappointments had worn it down to something harder. "Help you?" she asked, not looking up from the coffee pot she was refilling. "Ruth sent me, said you might be hiring." Now the woman looked up. Her eyes did the same journey Ruth's had, top to bottom, taking inventory, making calculations. "You ever work a kitchen before?" Some. The woman set down the coffee pot. "I need someone who can handle breakfast rush, lunch rush, and dinner service. Sometimes all three. No breaks except to piss, and even that you do fast. Pays $9.50 an hour, tips if you're lucky, and you work every shift I tell you to work. You got a problem with any of that?" "No, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am. Makes me feel old. Name's Marlene." She looked Clara over one more time, then sighed like she was making a decision she'd regret. "You got a place to stay?" Clara hesitated. "Not yet." Jesus. Marlene rubbed her face with both hands. "There's a room above the storage shed out back. Used to rent it out, but the last guy who stayed there was cooking meth, so now I'm picky. 100 a week, utilities included. You want it?" "Yes." "You don't even know what it looks like." "Doesn't matter." Marlene stared at her for a long moment. "You running from something?" The question landed like a physical thing. Clara felt it in her chest, sharp and cold. "No," she lied. Marlene didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. "Start tomorrow, 5 a.m. You're late, you're fired. You steal, you're fired. You give me attitude, you're fired. We clear?" "Yes." "Then get out of here. I got customers." Clara turned to go, then stopped. "Thank you." Marlene waved her off like gratitude made her uncomfortable. "Don't thank me yet. You probably won't last the week." The room above the storage shed was exactly what Clara expected. Small, cold, smelling of mildew and mouse droppings. A single bed with a mattress that had seen better decades. A hot plate with one working burner. A bathroom the size of a closet with a shower that dripped rust-colored water. It was perfect. Clara dropped her duffel on the bed and sat down beside it. The mattress sagged under her weight, springs groaning in protest. She closed her eyes and let herself feel it. The exhaustion, the fear, the desperate relief of having made it this far. Somewhere out there, back in the flat country Marlene had mentioned, there were people looking for her. Not police. Worse than police. The kind of people who didn't stop looking just because you crossed state lines. She'd covered her tracks as best she could, paid cash for everything, changed buses 3 times, ditched her phone in a rest stop bathroom in Nebraska, cut her hair in a gas station in Wyoming. But she knew better than to think she was safe. She'd never be safe. The best she could hope for was invisible. And Black Hollow, with its suspicious stares and harsh judgment, might be the perfect place for that. People here didn't ask questions because they didn't care enough to know the answers. They'd already decided who she was the moment she stepped off that bus. Let them think what they wanted. Let them underestimate her. She'd survived worse than their contempt. 5 a.m. came early and brutal. Clara woke to darkness and cold that bit through the thin blanket she'd found in the storage shed. Her breath misted in the air. No heat in the room. She'd have to ask Marlene about that, though she already suspected the answer would be something along the lines of deal with it. She dressed in the dark, jeans, thermal shirt, flannel over that, work boots that had cost her $40 at a Goodwill in Colorado. Everything was thrift store, secondhand, nobody's favorite. That was fine. She'd learned a long time ago that buying new clothes in her size meant either spending a fortune or accepting whatever hideous patterns the manufacturers assumed fat women wanted to wear. The diner was dark when she arrived, but the door was unlocked. Inside, Marlene was already moving through the kitchen like a small, efficient storm. "You're 2 minutes late," Marlene said without looking up. Clara checked her phone. 5:02 a.m. "Sorry." "Don't be sorry, be on time." Marlene pointed to a stained apron hanging on a hook. "Put that on. Breakfast crowd starts at 6. You're on eggs, bacon, hash browns. I'll handle pancakes and the grill. Move fast, keep up, don't burn anything." The next 90 minutes were chaos. Men poured through the door like they'd been waiting outside in the dark. Ranchers, construction workers, maintenance crews from the county road department. They filled every booth, every stool at the counter, shouting orders that overlapped and contradicted each other. 2 scrambled bacon crispy, 3 over easy don't break the yolks. Hash browns extra crispy, and I mean crispy, not that soggy shit from yesterday. Clara's hands moved on muscle memory she didn't know she had. Crack eggs, flip bacon, scrape the griddle. Her eyes stung from smoke and grease. Sweat ran down her back despite the cold. Her feet screamed in her boots. But she kept up. Barely. Marlene never said a word. Not praise, not criticism, just a constant stream of orders that Clara followed like they were the only thing keeping her from drowning. At 7:30, the rush broke. The last of the breakfast crowd filtered out, leaving behind empty plates, crumpled napkins, and tips that were either generous or insulting depending on the customer. Clara leaned against the counter, breathing hard. Marlene appeared beside her, coffee pot in hand. She poured 2 cups without asking, slid one across to Clara. "You didn't quit," Marlene said. "No." "Thought you might." Clara wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the heat sink into her palms. "When's lunch?" Marlene almost smiled. Almost. 11:30? You got 3 hours, clean the kitchen, prep vegetables, inventory the walk-in. List is on the wall. Clara looked at the list. 23 items, single-spaced. "Get moving," Marlene said, and disappeared into her office. By the end of the first week, Clara had learned 3 things about Black Hollow. 1. The town ran on suspicion and judgment the way other places ran on electricity. Everyone watched everyone, and strangers were guilty until proven otherwise. She'd caught whispers every time she walked down Main Street, fragments of speculation about who she was, where she'd come from, why she was here. None of the speculation was kind. 2. The work never stopped. She pulled 12-hour shifts at the diner, sometimes longer when Marlene needed coverage. Her feet developed blisters that popped and reformed. Her lower back ached in a way that suggested something permanent was happening to her spine. She fell into bed each night too exhausted to even take off her boots. 3. She was good at this. Not the cooking, that was simple, mechanical, just following recipes and timing. But the work itself. The relentless grinding, no one gives a shit how tired you are nature of it. She understood that. Had been living that her whole life in different ways. Friday afternoon, she was loading supplies from the delivery truck when a man approached the diner. He was different from the usual customers. Older, maybe mid-60s, wearing a sheriff's badge that caught the light like a warning. "Afternoon," he said, tipping his hat. "You the new girl working for Marlene?" Clara set down a box of canned tomatoes. "Yes, sir." "Name's Sheriff Hayward." He had the kind of face that looked friendly right up until you noticed his eyes, which were cold and calculating. "Wanted to introduce myself, like to know who's new in town." "Clara Boone." "Where you from, Clara?" There it was. The question she'd been expecting. "Nebraska," she lied. She'd actually never set foot in Nebraska, which made it a safer lie than the truth. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Needed work. Found it." Sheriff Hayward smiled, but it didn't reach those cold eyes. "That's it? Just picked Black Hollow off a map?" "Something like that." "Huh." He rocked back on his heels, studying her the way Marlene and Ruth had, like she was a problem that needed solving. "Well, welcome to town. You need anything? My office is right across from the post office. We're a peaceful community here. Like to keep it that way." The implication was clear. Don't cause trouble. "Understood," Clara said. He tipped his hat again and walked away, but she could feel his attention lingering like a hand on her shoulder. She'd been here a week and already law enforcement was taking notice. That wasn't good. That was the opposite of good. She forced herself to breathe, forced herself to keep moving, loading boxes, following routine, becoming invisible through repetition. Marlene appeared in the doorway. "Hayward give you trouble?" Just introducing himself. "That man doesn't do anything just. He's probably running your name through every database he can access right now." Marlene crossed her arms. "You want to tell me what you're really running from?" Clara met her eyes. "No." They stood there in silence for a moment. Then Marlene nodded, like Clara had passed some kind of test. "Fair enough. But if whatever you're running from shows up here, you tell me first. I don't like surprises." "Okay. And Clara?" Marlene's expression softened, just barely. "You're doing good work. Keep it up." It was the first compliment Clara had received in longer than she could remember. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. The following Monday, everything changed. Clara was prepping for lunch when a man walked into the diner who didn't fit the usual pattern. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of build that came from actual work, not a gym. Maybe 40, maybe older. It was hard to tell with men like that, men whose faces had been weathered by sun and wind until age became irrelevant. He wore a canvas jacket dark with old stains, jeans that had been repaired more than once, boots that looked like they'd walked 1,000 miles of rough country. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Gray, like winter sky, and absolutely empty of anything soft. He sat at the counter without looking at the menu. Marlene emerged from the kitchen, saw him, and her entire demeanor shifted. Not warmth exactly, but something like respect. "Ridge," she said, "don't usually see you in town this time of year." "Need supplies." His voice matched his eyes, cold, economical, giving nothing away. "And coffee. Coffee I can do." Marlene poured him a cup. "You eating?" "Just coffee." Marlene glanced at Clara, then back to Ridge. "You still looking for help up at your place?" That got his attention. He looked at Marlene, then followed her gaze to Clara. His expression didn't change, but Clara felt the weight of his assessment like a physical thing. She'd been judged by experts her whole life. This was something different. He wasn't judging her appearance or making assumptions about her capabilities. He was just measuring. "Depends," Ridge said. "You vouching for her? She works hard, shows up on time, doesn't complain." "That all?" Marlene hesitated. "She's running from something. Don't know what. But she's not trouble, far as I can tell." Clara felt her stomach drop. She opened her mouth to protest, to defend herself, but Marlene shot her a look that said, "Shut up and let me handle this." Ridge drank his coffee in silence. When he spoke again, it was to Clara directly. "You got ranch experience?" "No." "Can you ride?" "I can learn." "Learn ain't good enough. Need someone who can work now." Clara felt something shift inside her, the same desperate determination that had gotten her on that bus, that had kept her moving when everything in her wanted to stop. "Then teach me fast," she said. Ridge's eyes narrowed slightly. "Works hard. Altitude's harder. Place I run is at 9,000 feet. Air's thin. Cold comes early, stays late. You'll be bunking in an old line shack with no heat except a wood stove. Wages are $200 a week plus room and board. You work 7 days, no days off till spring thaw." "I'll take it." "You don't even know what the work is." "Doesn't matter." Ridge studied her for a long moment. Clara forced herself not to look away, not to flinch under that cold gray stare. Finally, he said, "You got gear? Cold weather clothes? Boots that'll handle snow?" "I'll get what I need." "You got money for that?" Clara thought about the $342 in her duffel, everything she had left in the world. "Yes." Ridge drained his coffee and stood. "I'm leaving at dawn. You're at the south end of Main Street at 5 a.m. sharp. You got yourself a job. You're late. Offer's gone." He pulled cash from his wallet, dropped it on the counter, and walked out without another word. Clara stood there, heart pounding, not quite believing what had just happened. Marlene was smiling, a real smile this time, not the careful, neutral expression she usually wore. "Well," she said, "congratulations. You just got hired by the hardest man in 3 counties. "Who is he?" "Ridge Callahan. Runs a cattle operation up on the high range. Keeps to himself. Doesn't trust easy. Lost his wife and daughter in a car accident about 8 years back. Been alone ever since." Marlene refilled her own coffee cup. "He's not cruel, but he's not kind either. You'll work harder than you've ever worked in your life. And if you can't handle it, he won't give you a second chance." Clara looked toward the door where Ridge had disappeared. "Why'd he hire me?" "Because I told him you show up and do the work. That's all Ridge cares about. He doesn't give a damn what you look like or where you came from. You pull your weight. You're valuable. You don't, you're gone." Marlene paused. "It's honest work, Clara. Hard but honest. Better than hiding in a diner kitchen." "I wasn't hiding." Marlene raised an eyebrow. "Weren't you?" Clara didn't have an answer for that. She spent that afternoon at the general store stretching her money across the necessities: thermal underwear, wool socks, a heavier jacket than the one she owned, gloves that actually fit, a hat that would cover her ears. Ruth, who ran the store the same way she seemed to run half the town, watched her shop with undisguised curiosity. "Heard you're going up to work Ridge's place," Ruth said as Clara brought her purchases to the counter. Word traveled fast in Black Hollow. Too fast. "Yes, ma'am." "That's a mistake." Ruth rang up the items with sharp, efficient movements. "Ridge don't hire women, barely hires men. Last person who worked for him lasted 3 weeks before the mountain broke him." "I'm not easy to break," Ruth snorted. "Honey, everyone thinks that until the mountain proves them wrong." She bagged the items. $218. Clara counted out the bills, watching her safety net shrink with each one. When this was done, she'd have $124 left, barely enough to run if she needed to, not enough to survive if the job didn't work out. She had no choice but to make it work. Ruth handed over the bag. "Good luck, you're going to need it." That night, lying in her cold room above the storage shed, Clara allowed herself to think about what she was doing. Really think about it. She was going to live on a mountain with a stranger, a hard, closed-off man who'd lost everything and probably wouldn't hesitate to fire her the moment she proved useless. She'd be isolated, cut off, miles from town with no transportation of her own. If the people looking for her found her up there, no one would hear her scream. But then again, no one had heard her scream before, and she'd survived that too. She thought about her mother, dead now for 5 years. Thought about her father, who'd vanished when Clara was 12 and never came back. Thought about the man she'd been running from, Derek, with his charming smile and his gentle voice and his hands that left bruises in places no one could see. Thought about the moment she'd finally fought back, the moment that had forced her to run. Clara rolled onto her side, pulling the thin blanket tighter. No, the mountain couldn't be worse than what she'd already survived. And maybe, just maybe, it would be the place where she finally stopped running, where she finally stood her ground. 5 a.m. came dark and freezing. Clara stood at the south end of Main Street with her duffel and her new gear, watching her breath form clouds in the pre-dawn air. The sky was just beginning to lighten at the edges. Not sunrise yet, but the promise of it. A truck rumbled up the empty street. Old Ford, maybe early 2000s, with a dented fender and a bed full of supplies covered by a tarp. Ridge was behind the wheel, face expressionless. He didn't get out, just leaned across and pushed open the passenger door. Clara threw her duffel in the back and climbed in. The cab smelled like coffee and diesel and something else. Wood smoke, maybe. Or just the mountain itself already claiming ownership. Ridge didn't say good morning, didn't ask if she was ready, just put the truck in gear and drove. They left Black Hollow behind as the sun finally broke over the eastern ridge, painting the mountains in shades of gold and shadow. The road climbed steadily, switchbacking through pine forests that grew thicker and darker the higher they went. Clara's ears popped. The altitude was already making itself known. 20 minutes passed in silence. Then 30. Clara kept waiting for Ridge to say something, to explain the work, to set expectations, to ask her literally anything about herself. He didn't. They passed a sign that read, "Private property, no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." 5 minutes later, another sign. Callahan Ranch, established 1952. The road got rougher. Gravel gave way to dirt. Smooth dirt gave way to ruts and rocks that made the truck bounce and shudder. Through the trees, Clara caught glimpses of open range, grassland rolling up toward higher peaks, dotted with cattle that looked small as toys from this distance. Finally, Ridge spoke. "Can you handle a gun?" Clara looked at him. "Yes." "You afraid of blood?" "No." "You got any medical conditions I should know about? Heart problems? Asthma? Anything that'll cause trouble at altitude?" "No." "You allergic to anything?" "No." Ridge nodded like she'd passed some minimum threshold. "There's 4 other men working the ranch right now. They ain't going to like you being here. They're going to test you, push you, try to make you quit. You let them know you're weak, they'll walk all over you." "I'm not weak." "Didn't say you were. Said if you let them think you are, they'll make your life hell." Clara absorbed that. "What should I do?" "Your job. Nothing more, nothing less. You prove yourself through work, not words." They crested a ridge, and suddenly the ranch spread out below them, a handful of buildings clustered in a narrow valley surrounded by mountains on all sides. Main house, barn, several smaller structures she couldn't identify. corrals with horses, more cattle dotting the slopes. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, like the land itself was daring you to survive it. Ridge parked in front of the barn. Before Clara could open her door, 3 men emerged from various directions, all of them stopping short when they saw her. The youngest was maybe 25, with the kind of face that suggested he'd been good-looking before too much sun, and hard living started aging him prematurely. He stared at Clara with open confusion. The second was older, 40s maybe, built like a fire hydrant, short, solid, mean-looking. His expression when he saw her was pure contempt. The third was lean and weathered, somewhere in his 50s, with eyes that missed nothing. He looked from Clara to Ridge with an expression that said, "What the hell are you thinking?" Ridge got out of the truck. "This is Clara. She's working here now." The fire hydrant laughed. "The hell she is."
"She is," Ridge said flatly. "You got a problem with that, Bryce. You can draw your wages and leave." Bryce's face darkened. "Boss, come on. Look at her. She ain't gonna last a day up here." "That's her problem, not yours." The lean one, clearly the smartest of the 3, just shook his head slowly. "Ridge, I respect you, but this is a mistake."
"Noted?" Ridge pulled Clara's duffel from the truck bed and handed it to her. "Line shack's beyond the barn. You'll bunk there. Get settled, then come to the main house. We're doing a supply run to the upper range this afternoon. You're coming." He walked away, leaving Clara standing there with 3 men who looked at her like she was a problem they'd been assigned to solve. The young one broke first. "I'm Tyler," he said, offering something that might have been meant as a friendly smile.
"That's Bryce, and that's Kincaid." "Clara." "Yeah, we heard." Tyler rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, it's not personal, but work up here it's hard, real hard. And what?" Clara met his eyes. "I don't look like I can handle it?" Tyler flushed. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Bryce spat in the dirt. "This is bullshit. Ridge has lost his goddamn mind."
Kincaid put a hand on Bryce's shoulder, a warning. "Let it go. She'll be gone in a week anyway." They walked away, leaving Clara alone in the yard with her duffel, and the certain knowledge that every single one of them expected her to fail. She'd show them. She'd show all of them. Clara picked up her duffel and went to find the line shack, the mountain wind already biting through her new jacket, already testing her resolve. Behind her, cattle lowed in the distance. Above her, the peaks stood silent and judging. This was her life now, and she was going to survive it. The line shack was worse than the room above Marlene's storage shed, and that was saying something. One room, maybe 12 by 12, with walls so thin Clara could see daylight through the gaps in the boards. A metal frame bed with a mattress that looked like it had survived a war. A wood stove in the corner, cold and empty. A single window with glass so dirty it barely let light through. The floor was rough plank, warped in places, and when Clara stepped inside, something small and fast skittered away into the shadows. She dropped her duffel on the bed and sat down beside it. The mattress didn't just sag. It practically collapsed under her weight, springs screaming in protest, loud enough that she glanced toward the door, half expecting one of the men to come investigate the noise. No one came. Clara looked around the shack, at the water stains on the ceiling, at the mouse droppings in the corner, at the cobwebs thick as curtains in the rafters. She thought about the apartment she'd left behind. Small, but clean. Warm. Safe. Until it wasn't. This was what safety looked like now. Cold, dirty, and smelling like something had died in the walls. She stood up and got to work. There was a broom leaning against the wall, bristles worn down to nubs. She used it anyway, sweeping out the mouse droppings, the dead insects, the accumulation of dust and debris that suggested no one had stayed here in months, maybe years. She found a bucket behind the shack, filled it from a pump that took 20 tries to get working, and scrubbed the floor until her back screamed and her knees went numb. The stove was next. She cleared out the old ash, checked the flue, it seemed intact at least, and started looking for firewood. There was a pile behind the barn, covered with a tarp. She loaded her arms with as much as she could carry and hauled it back to the shack, making 3 trips before she had enough to get through the night. By the time she finished, her hands were black with soot and her thermal shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cold. But the shack looked almost livable. Almost. She washed her hands and face at the pump, the water so cold it made her bones ache. then headed toward the main house the way Ridge had instructed. The house was bigger than she'd expected. 2 stories, logs dark with age, smoke rising from a stone chimney. She climbed the porch steps and knocked. Ridge opened the door almost immediately, like he'd been waiting. "You settled?" "Yes." He studied her face, her hand still red from the cold water. "You cleaned that shack?" It needed it. Something flickered in his expression, not quite approval, but close. "Come in. We're going over the route." Inside, the house was warm and sparse, functional. No pictures on the walls, no decorations, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here versus just existed in it. The furniture was old but well-maintained. Everything had a purpose and nothing was wasted. The 3 men were gathered around a large table covered with a hand-drawn map. They looked up when Clara entered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop about 10 degrees. Ridge moved to the table without acknowledging the shift. "We're moving supplies to the upper range camp. Feed, salt blocks, medical supplies, propane. Trail's rough this time of year. Takes about 3 hours to get up there, longer coming back down. Weather's supposed to hold, but weather don't always do what it's supposed to." Bryce crossed his arms. "How much can she even carry? We'll have to redistribute weight, slow the whole operation down." "She'll carry what everyone else carries," Ridge said. "Won't be any redistribution." "Boss, that's not fair to her or us. She's going to slow us down no matter what." Ridge's eyes went flat and cold. "You questioning my judgment?" Bryce's jaw worked, but he didn't answer. "That's what I thought." Ridge turned back to the map. "Tyler, you're on point. Kincaid, you're bringing up the rear. Bryce, you and Clara are in the middle with the pack string. I'll be floating position, making sure nothing goes wrong." "And if something does go wrong," Kincaid asked quietly, "then we deal with it." Ridge looked at Clara. "You ever worked with pack horses?" "No. It's simple. Stay with your assigned animals, keep the loads balanced, don't let them spook. They know the trail better than you do, so trust them. You fall behind, you whistle loud. Someone will circle back. You get hurt, you say so immediately. Don't try to tough it out. Up here, tough gets you killed." Clara nodded, absorbing every word. "Questions?" Ridge asked. She had about 100, but she knew better than to ask them. "No." "Then get water and food in you. We leave in 20 minutes. The men filed out. Clara started to follow, but Ridge's voice stopped her. "Clara." She turned. Ridge stood by the table, one hand resting on the map. "They're going to make this hard for you, harder than it needs to be. That's on them, not you. You do your job, you'll be fine." It was the closest thing to encouragement she'd gotten since arriving. She didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded and left. Outside, Tyler was loading pack saddles onto a string of horses tied to the corral fence. He glanced at Clara as she approached, but didn't say anything. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. "Can I help?" Clara asked finally. Tyler hefted another saddle. "You know how to cinch a pack saddle?" "No." "Then no, you can't help." But his tone wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. He secured the saddle, checked the straps twice, then moved to the next horse. "Look, I'm not trying to be a dick, but this isn't like working in a diner. You make a mistake up here, it's not a burned egg or a wrong order. It's someone getting hurt. Or worse." "I understand that. Do you?" Tyler stopped and looked at her directly. "Because I've seen people come up to this ranch thinking they're tough, thinking they can handle anything. The mountain doesn't care how tough you think you are. It'll break you anyway." Clara met his eyes. "Then I'll break and get back up." Tyler studied her for a long moment, then went back to the horses. "We'll see." Bryce appeared from the barn leading 3 more horses, already packed and ready. He didn't even glance at Clara, just tied them to the string and walked away like she didn't exist. Kincaid was the last to arrive, carrying a rifle in a saddle scabbard. He secured it to his horse with practiced efficiency, then addressed Clara without looking at her. "You got a weapon?" "No. There's mountain lions up where we're going, black bears too, though they should be thinking about hibernation by now. You run into either one, you don't run. You make yourself big, make noise, back away slow. They charge, you stand your ground, and you scream like hell. Most times they'll break off, sometimes they won't. What happens if they don't?" Now Kincaid did look at her. "Then we shoot them, which is why someone should have given you a rifle." He called toward the house. "Ridge, she's unarmed." Ridge emerged carrying a lever-action rifle and a box of ammunition. He handed both to Clara. "You know how to use this?" The weight of the rifle brought back memories she'd tried to bury. Her father, before he left, taking her to a gravel pit outside town, teaching her to shoot tin cans off fence posts, his hands on her shoulders, correcting her stance, his voice in her ear. "Breathe out slow, squeeze, don't pull." "Yes," Clara said. "Show me." Clara checked the chamber, empty. Worked the action, brought the rifle to her shoulder, found the sight picture, dry fired. The motion was muscle memory, automatic. Ridge took the rifle back, loaded 3 rounds, pointed to a fence post about 50 yards away. "Hit that." The men stopped what they were doing to watch. Clara felt their eyes on her like weight. She took the rifle, seated it against her shoulder, breathed out slow the way her father had taught her, and fired. The fence post splintered. She worked the action, fired again. Another hit, 3rd shot, dead center. She lowered the rifle and looked at Ridge. His expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes suggested he was recalculating his assessment of her. "Good enough," he said, and took the rifle back to reload it properly. "Keep it with you. Hope you don't need it." Bryce spat in the dirt. "Anybody can hit a stationary target. Let's see how she does when she's exhausted and something's charging at her." "Let's hope we don't find out," Kincaid said quietly. Ridge mounted his horse, a big gray gelding that looked like it had seen as many years as its rider. "Mount up. We're burning daylight." Clara looked at the horses, at the men already in their saddles, at the stirrup that seemed impossibly high off the ground. Her last riding experience had been a pony ride at a county fair when she was 9. This was not going to go well. Tyler brought over a smaller horse, a bay mare with kind eyes. "This is Rosie. She's old and she's patient. Use the fence to mount if you need to." Clara appreciated that he'd said if instead of when, even though they both knew she'd need it. She led Rosie to the fence, climbed up 2 rails, and managed to swing her leg over the saddle with only minimal gracelessness. The stirrups were too long. She fumbled with them, trying to adjust the leather while the horse shifted beneath her. "Here." Tyler rode up beside her and adjusted the stirrups with quick, efficient movements. "Better?" "Yes, thank you." "Don't thank me yet." He rode back to his position at the front of the string. Ridge looked back at the group, making a final assessment. Then he nodded once and turned his horse toward the trail. They rode. The first hour wasn't terrible. The trail was wide and relatively flat, cutting through pine forest thick with shadow. Clara focused on staying in the saddle, on moving with the horse instead of against it, on not falling off and humiliating herself in front of men who were already convinced she didn't belong. The pack horses followed on a lead line attached to Bryce's saddle, their loads swaying with each step. Clara's job was to ride behind them, watch for problems, call out if anything shifted or came loose. It was simple enough that she could almost convince herself she could do this. Then the trail started climbing, not gradually, immediately and aggressively, switching back and forth across the mountain face in tight hairpin turns that made Clara's stomach drop every time she looked down. The trees thinned, the air got colder, her lungs started burning, pulling hard for oxygen that wasn't there. Rosie climbed steadily, her hooves finding purchase on loose rock and exposed roots like she'd made this journey 1,000 times. She probably had. Clara just tried to stay on her back and not think about the drop-off inches from the trail's edge. Ahead, she heard Tyler call back to Bryce. "Second pack horse is listing left. Check the load." Bryce pulled up, forcing Clara to stop as well. He dismounted and moved to the horse in question, checking the panniers with rough, impatient movements. "It's fine. Just shifted. Tyler's being paranoid." "If Tyler says check it, you check it properly." Ridge's voice came from somewhere behind them. Bryce's jaw tightened, but he rechecked the load more carefully this time. "There. Happy?" No one answered. They started moving again. The second hour was worse. The trail narrowed to barely wider than the horses themselves. In places, the outside edge had crumbled away entirely, leaving nothing but air and a 200-foot drop to a boulder field below. Clara kept her eyes forward, focused on the pack horses' swaying loads, trying not to imagine what would happen if Rosie stumbled. Her thighs were screaming. Muscles she didn't know she had were cramping. The saddle's constant friction was doing things to her inner thighs that would probably leave her barely able to walk tomorrow. She shifted her weight, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. There wasn't one. Behind her, she heard Ridge's horse. He'd dropped back, she realized, riding drag to make sure she didn't fall behind. The knowledge that he was watching made her sit up straighter, ignore the pain, keep moving. They climbed above the tree line into open alpine meadow, brown and dying as winter approached. The wind hit them like a living thing, cold and relentless, cutting through Clara's jacket like it wasn't there. Her eyes watered. Her face went numb. "You okay?" Ridge asked from behind her. Clara wanted to say yes, to prove she was fine, but her lips were too cold to form words properly. She just nodded. "Use your neck gaiter. Cover your face." She'd forgotten she had one. She pulled it up over her nose and mouth, and the difference was immediate. Not warm, exactly, but bearable. They rode through the meadow, the wind pushing against them, the horses leaning into it. In the distance, Claire could see more peaks, jagged and snow-covered, stretching to the horizon. It was beautiful in a way that made her feel small and insignificant and completely out of her depth. The third hour was the hardest. The trail descended into a narrow canyon, rocky and treacherous, with a creek running alongside it. They had to cross the creek 4 times, the horses picking their way across on submerged stones that Clara couldn't see under the rushing water. Each crossing, she was certain Rosie would slip, would fall, would dump her into water cold enough to kill. Each time, Rosie made it across like it was nothing. Clara's hands were shaking on the reins, from cold, from exhaustion, from fear she couldn't afford to show. Her lower back felt like someone had driven a spike through it. She'd lost feeling in her feet an hour ago. Just when she thought she couldn't go another step, the trail opened up into a small valley. Ahead, she could see rough structures, shelters built against the canyon wall, corrals for horses, a storage shed that looked like it might collapse if someone breathed on it wrong. The upper range camp. Ridge rode past her to the front, taking over from Tyler. "Unload the pack string first. Food and medical supplies go in the main shelter. Feed and salt in the storage shed. Propane stays outside, away from any structure. Move fast. We got maybe 2 hours of good light left, and I want to be halfway down the mountain before dark." The men dismounted and started working. Clara tried to dismount and discovered her legs had stopped functioning. She got one foot out of the stirrup, swung her leg over, and basically fell off the horse in a barely controlled collapse. She caught herself on the saddle, legs shaking, and tried to pretend that was exactly how she'd meant to do it. Bryce saw her, laughed. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Clara ignored him and forced her legs to work, leading Rosie toward the corral. The horse deserved water and rest, even if Clara didn't. Tyler appeared beside her. "First time's always rough. You'll adapt." "How long does that take?" "For most people? Couple weeks?" He paused. "For you? Might be longer." It wasn't mean-spirited, just honest. Clara appreciated that more than she would have appreciated a lie. She helped where she could, carrying boxes, holding ropes, while the men secured tarps, trying to be useful without getting in the way. Her body was one continuous ache. Her hands so cold she could barely grip anything, but she kept moving because stopping meant admitting she couldn't handle this. Ridge worked alongside them, never asking anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. Clara watched him carry 100-pound feed sacks like they weighed nothing, noticed how he checked every load twice, caught him quietly correcting Tyler's rope work without making it a criticism. This was a man who'd spent his entire life in places like this, who'd learned to survive through competence and caution and never trusting that anything would be easy. Clara understood that. Understood him, maybe, in a way that surprised her. When the last of the supplies were secured, Ridge surveyed the camp one final time, then nodded. "Good. Mount up. We're heading down." The ride back was a special kind of hell. Clara's legs could barely grip the saddle. Every step sent pain shooting through her thighs and back. The light was fading, turning the trail into a series of shadows and guesses. Rosie knew the way, thank God, because Clara sure as hell couldn't see it. Halfway down, it started snowing. Not heavy, just thin flakes that swirled in the wind and melted immediately when they hit the ground. But it made the rocks slick, made the horses cautious, made everything take twice as long. Clara focused on the pack horses ahead of her, on the rhythm of Rosie's walk, on anything except the exhaustion threatening to pull her right out of the saddle. Her eyes kept trying to close. She jerked awake twice, heart pounding, convinced she was falling. "Stay awake." Ridge's voice cut through the darkness. He dropped back again. "You fall asleep up here. You fall off. You fall off, you're done." "I'm awake," Clara managed, Prove it. Talk to me. She didn't want to talk. Wanted to save every bit of energy for just staying conscious, but Ridge clearly wasn't going to let it go. About what? She asked. Anything. Where you learned to shoot. Clara was quiet for a moment, debating how much truth to give him. My father taught me, before he left. How old were you? 12 when he taught me, 12 when he left. Ridge didn't say anything for a while. Then, that's rough. It was a long time ago. Some things don't stop being rough just because they happened a long time ago. Clara glanced back at him, but she couldn't see his face in the darkness. You speaking from experience? Yeah. They rode in silence after that, but it felt different somehow. Less like she was being tested and more like they were just two people who'd survived things they didn't want to talk about. They made it back to the ranch just after full dark. Clara dismounted, fell off, really, and stood on legs that shook so badly she had to hold onto the saddle to stay upright. Kincaid took Rosie's reins. I'll handle her. You get inside and warm up before you freeze to death. It was the first kind thing any of them except Tyler had said to her. Clara nodded her thanks and stumbled toward the line shack. Inside, the cold was absolute. She'd forgotten to bank the fire before leaving. The stove was dead, the shack barely warmer than outside. Clara stood in the darkness, so tired she couldn't remember what she was supposed to do next. Fire. She needed fire. She fumbled with matches, her hand shaking so badly it took 6 tries to light one. The kindling caught slowly, smoke filling the small space before the draft finally pulled it up the flue. She fed in larger pieces, built it up, stood as close as she dared while warmth slowly began to fill the room. Her stomach growled. When had she last eaten? Breakfast. A piece of toast and coffee. That was 14 hours ago. There was a knock at the door. Clara opened it to find Tyler standing there holding a covered plate. Leftover stew from last night, he said, handing it over. Ridge said, make sure you eat before you sleep. The plate was still warm. The smell made Clara's stomach cramp with hunger. Thank you, she said. Tyler shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. Look, you did okay today. Better than I expected, honestly. But tomorrow's going to be harder. We're moving the herd to lower pasture, and that means rounding them up from about 50 square miles of mountain. You're going to be riding all day, probably longer. You need to eat, sleep, and be ready at dawn. I will be. He nodded and started to leave, then paused. Bryce is an asshole. Don't let him get to you. Kincaid's fair, but he don't trust easy. And Ridge, Tyler trailed off. Ridge don't let nobody in. You're looking for friendship. You won't find it here. I'm not looking for friendship, Clara said. Just work. Then you came to the right place. Tyler touched the brim of his hat and disappeared into the darkness. Clara closed the door and ate the stew standing by the stove, too hungry to even sit down. It was good, simple, but made with care. When she finished, she put the plate aside and collapsed onto the bed, still fully dressed, too exhausted to even take off her boots. Sleep took her immediately and completely. She dreamed about the trail, about falling, about endless climbing through thin air that burned her lungs. She dreamed about her father teaching her to shoot, about his hands on her shoulders, about the day she came home from school to find him gone and her mother crying at the kitchen table. She dreamed about Derek, about his smile, about the first time he hit her and convinced her it was her fault. She woke before dawn, body screaming, the fire dead again, and forced herself to get up because Ridge had said dawn and dawn was coming whether she was ready or not. The second day was, as Tyler had promised, worse. The work started before sunrise. Clara stumbled to the barn in darkness to find the men already saddling horses, faces grim in the lantern light. Ridge handed her a thermos of coffee without a word. She drank it black and scalding, letting it burn some life back into her. They rode out as the sky lightened from black to gray. The plan, as Ridge explained it, was simple in concept and brutal in execution. Split up, cover as much ground as possible, find the cattle scattered across the high country, and push them down to the lower valley before the first real snow hit. You're with me, Ridge told Clara. Stay close. Do what I tell you when I tell you, and don't try to be a hero. These cattle have been ranging wild all summer. They're not tame and they're not friendly. They rode east into rising sun, just the two of them, leaving the others to cover different sections. The country opened up around them, vast rolling hills covered in dry grass, scattered pine groves, rocky outcrops that looked like they'd been there since the beginning of time. Ridge rode ahead, reading the land in ways Clara couldn't begin to understand. He'd stop periodically, studying tracks or droppings or broken grass, making calculations she couldn't follow. "There," he said finally, pointing toward a grove about half a mile distant. "Probably 20, 30 head in there. We're going to circle around, come at them from above, push them out toward the valley trail." He made it sound easy. It wasn't. The cattle spooked the moment they saw the horses, crashing through the trees in different directions. Ridge went after the main group, leaving Clara to try to push the stragglers. Rosie knew her job, cutting and weaving without Clara having to do much more than stay in the saddle, but the cattle were fast and unpredictable, doubling back or breaking off in new directions every time Clara thought she had them moving the right way. One steer, a big black brute with horns that looked sharp enough to gut a horse, turned and faced her down. Rosie stopped, ears back, clearly not interested in getting any closer. "Move!" Clara yelled, waving her arms the way she'd seen Ridge do. The steer didn't move, just stood there, sides heaving, looking at her with what Clara could only describe as pure contempt. She heard hoofbeats and Ridge appeared from the trees, rope already swinging. He put the loop over the steer's horns on the first throw, dallied the rope around his saddle horn, and his horse immediately started backing up, pulling the steer off balance. The steer fought, digging in, but Ridge's horse was stronger. It dragged the steer toward the main group until the animal finally gave up and went with the herd. Ridge coiled his rope, didn't even look at Clara, just said, "Stay behind them. Keep them moving. They try to break off. You cut them off. Use the horse." He rode back to the front of the herd, leaving Clara to figure it out. She figured it out, sort of. By noon, they'd gathered maybe 80 head and pushed them to a holding area where Tyler's group had another 40 waiting. Bryce showed up an hour later with 30 more, looking dusty and mean. "Where's Kincaid?" Ridge asked. "Still working the northern section. Said he found a big group up near the old mine." Ridge nodded. "We'll hold these here. Go help him." They rode north, climbing again, Clara's legs already protesting. The northern section was rougher country, steep slopes, loose rock, patches of early snow in the shadowed areas. Clara's hands were numb on the reins, her face raw from wind. They found Kincaid trying to move about 60 head down a narrow ravine. The cattle were balking, not wanting to commit to the steep descent. Every time Kincaid got a few moving, the rest would scatter back up the slope. "Stubborn bastards," Kincaid called when he saw them. "Been at this for an hour." Ridge assessed the situation. "Bryce, you and Kincaid push from above. Tyler, you're on the left flank. Clara, you're with me on the right. We're going to funnel them into the ravine whether they like it or not." It was chaos. The cattle broke in every direction, forcing the riders to constantly adjust, constantly chase. Clara found herself riding across slopes so steep she had to lean into the hill to stay balanced. Rosie scrambling over rock and through scrub pine. One moment she was behind 3 cows, pushing them toward the ravine. The next, her attention shifted to a calf breaking right, and when she looked back, the 3 cows had vanished. She heard them before she saw them, crashing through brush somewhere below her position. She urged Rosie down the slope, branches whipping at her face, and found the cows trapped in a small box canyon with no way out except back the way they'd come. Back toward Clara. They charged. Not individually. All 3 at once, heads down, running scared and angry. Rosie wheeled and bolted back up the slope, nearly unseating Clara. Hooves scrambled on loose rock. A branch caught Clara across the chest, knocking the wind out of her. She grabbed the saddle horn with both hands and held on while Rosie climbed, the cows right behind them. They burst out of the brush onto open slope. The cows veered off toward the main herd, finally going the right direction. Clara pulled Rosie to a stop and sat there gasping, heart hammering, aware of how close she'd just come to getting trampled. Ridge appeared beside her. "You hurt?" "No." He looked her over like he didn't quite believe her, then nodded. Good work getting them out of there. It was the first compliment he'd given her. Clara didn't trust herself to respond without her voice shaking, so she just nodded. They worked until dark, gathering cattle, pushing them to lower ground, counting and recounting to make sure they hadn't missed any. By the time they got back to the ranch, Clara had been in the saddle for almost 13 hours. She dismounted and her legs gave out completely. She hit the ground hard, pain shooting through her hip. Tyler was there immediately, helping her up. "Easy, you're done. I'll handle your horse. You can barely stand. Let me handle it." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to prove she could finish what she started, but her body had other ideas. She nodded and limped toward the line shack. Behind her, she heard Bryce's voice. Told you, she can't handle it. And Kincaid's response? She handled it better than you did your first season. Bullshit.
Not bullshit. I was here. You quit after 4 days. She's still here. Clara reached the shack and closed the door on whatever Bryce said next. She didn't care. Her body was a collection of pain, thighs rubbed raw, back screaming, shoulders and arms burning from holding reins all day. She'd lost skin on her hands where the reins had chafed through her gloves, but she'd done it. One more day survived. She built a fire, heated water for washing, cleaned herself as best she could with shaking hands, found salve in her pack and rubbed it on the worst of the chafing, knowing it would help but not enough. There was a knock. This time it was Ridge. He handed her a bottle. Ibuprofen. Take 4 now, 4 before bed. You're going to hurt worse tomorrow before it starts getting better. Thank you. He started to leave, then paused. Bryce is wrong. You handled yourself well today. He doesn't think so. Bryce doesn't think, period. He reacts. There's a difference. Ridge met her eyes. You proved something today. Not to them. To yourself. That matters more. He left before Clara could figure out how to respond to that. She took the ibuprofen, ate another plate of food Tyler brought by. She was starting to suspect Ridge was making him do it, and fell into bed. This time she slept dreamlessly, too exhausted for even nightmares.
The days blurred together after that. Riding at dawn, working cattle, learning through pain and repetition. Clara's body slowly, grudgingly, began to adapt. The altitude bothered her less. Her legs stopped screaming after every ride. The rawness on her inner thighs healed and toughened into calluses. She learned to rope. Not well, but competently enough to catch what she was aiming at maybe half the time. Learned to read cattle behavior, to anticipate where they'd break, to work with Rosie instead of fighting her. Learned which routes through the ranch were safe and which would get you killed if the weather turned. Learned that she was stronger than she thought. The men's attitude shifted in small, subtle ways. Bryce still sneered, but with less conviction. Kincaid started including her in decisions instead of talking around her. Tyler became something close to a friend, teaching her tricks and skills without making her feel stupid for not knowing them already. And Ridge remained an enigma, distant but fair, hard but not cruel. He rarely spoke to her beyond what was necessary, but Clara caught him watching sometimes, his gray eyes assessing in a way that made her think he was seeing something he hadn't expected. 3 weeks in, the first real snow came. Clara woke to find this world transformed. 6 inches of white covering everything, more falling steadily from a gray sky. She dressed in every layer she owned and stumbled to the barn where the men were already gearing up. "Welcome to winter," Tyler said, grinning. "Hope you're ready." She wasn't. Nobody could be ready for what winter meant on a high mountain ranch. But she was learning that being ready and surviving anyway were 2 different things. They spent the day breaking ice on water troughs, hauling hay to cattle who couldn't reach grass anymore, checking for animals trapped or injured. The work was endless and brutal, made worse by cold that cut through every layer and snow that turned every step into a battle. That night, Ridge called her to the main house after dinner. She went, nervous, wondering if he'd finally decided she wasn't worth the trouble. Inside, Kincaid and Tyler were already there, seated around the table with mugs of something steaming. Ridge poured a 4th mug and pushed it toward Clara. "Sit." She sat. Ridge leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Supply run to town tomorrow. Need to stock up before the road gets impassable. Normally I'd go alone, but I want Kincaid here to keep an eye on the herd. Tyler's going. Clara, you're going too." Bryce, sitting in the corner Clara hadn't noticed, spoke up. "Why her? I could—" "You're staying here to help Kincaid. End of discussion." Ridge turned back to Clara. "Town don't like me much, like you even less. But we need supplies, and I need someone who won't start a fight if people run their mouths. Tyler's diplomatic. You don't seem to give a damn what people think. That'll work." Clara sipped the drink, some kind of spiked cider, warm and strong. "What time do we leave?" 6 a.m. Be ready." It wasn't until later, lying in her shack, that Clara realized what had just happened. Ridge trusted her. Enough to send her to town as a representative of the ranch. Enough to count on her to handle herself. It was such a small thing. It felt enormous. She fell asleep smiling, despite the cold, despite the ache in her bones, despite everything she'd survived to get here. For the first time since running, Clara felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she could stop. The drive to Black Hollow started in darkness and silence. Ridge drove, hands steady on the wheel, eyes on the snow-covered road that twisted down from the ranch in switchbacks that made Clara's stomach drop even though she'd done this route before. Tyler sat in the back, dozing against the window, his breath fogging the glass. Clara watched the headlights cut through falling snow and tried not to think about the last time she'd been in town. The stares, the whispers, Ruth's assessment, Sheriff Hayward's cold suspicion. She'd managed to avoid Black Hollow for 3 weeks, living in the isolated bubble of the ranch where the only judgments that mattered were whether you could do the work. Now she was going back. Ridge must have sensed her tension because he spoke for the first time since they'd left. They're going to talk. Let them. I know. Silas Crow runs most of the businesses in town, owns the feed store, the hardware store, half the real estate. He's been trying to buy my water rights for 5 years. I keep saying no. Clara glanced at him. Why are you telling me this? Because when we get there, he's going to make things difficult. He always does. And if he sees you with me, he's going to use that. Ridge's jaw tightened. Man like Crow, he looks for weakness, looks for pressure points. You being a woman, being new, being... He trailed off. Being fat, Clara finished. You can say it. Ridge was quiet for a moment. I was going to say being an outsider, but yeah, he'll use all of it. He'll say things designed to make you feel small, make you angry, make you quit or make Ridge look bad for hiring you. I can handle it. I know you can. Just wanted you to know it's coming. They drove in silence after that. The sky lightened slowly from black to gray to the pale washed-out blue of winter morning. By the time they reached Black Hollow, the sun was up but hidden behind thick cloud cover that promised more snow. The town looked different, covered in white. Smaller somehow. Like the snow had compressed it into something even more isolated and forgotten than before. Main Street was nearly empty. A few trucks parked outside Marlene's diner, one at the post office, another at the Ridge bar. Ridge pulled up in front of the feed store. Through the window, Clara could see a man behind the counter, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive jacket that looked ridiculous in a place like this. He saw the truck, and his expression hardened. That's Crow, Ridge said. Stay close. Don't engage unless you have to. They got out. Tyler stretched and yawned, looking too young and cheerful for the tension radiating off Ridge. Clara followed them inside, the bell over the door announcing their arrival. The store smelled like grain and leather and old wood. It was warm, too warm after the cold outside. Crow stood behind the counter, arms crossed, looking at Ridge the way someone might look at a stain they couldn't quite scrub out. Ridge! His voice was smooth, educated, nothing like the rough mountain drawl most people here used. Didn't expect to see you. Thought you'd be snowed in by now. Not yet. Ridge pulled a list from his pocket. Need feed, salt blocks, veterinary supplies. Same as always. Crow took the list without looking at it, his eyes moving to Clara. And you brought help. The pause before help was deliberate, insulting. This is Clara. She works for me. Does she? Crow studied her openly, not even pretending politeness. How's that working out? Fine, Ridge said flatly. You going to fill that order, or do I need to drive to Bridger Falls? Oh, I'll fill it. Just surprised you're still in business, given your hiring practices. Crow smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Clara think of sharks. Heard you were having trouble keeping the herd healthy, losing calves, having to sell off sections of land just to stay afloat. You heard wrong. Did I? Crow set the list down. Because word around town is the Callahan Ranch is one bad season away from bankruptcy. Be a shame if that happened. All that land, all that water, going to waste. Ridge's expression didn't change, but Clara saw his hands tighten. You done speculating about my business, or you want to get started on that order? Crow held Ridge's stare for a long moment, then called toward the back. Danny, load up feed and salt for Callahan. A kid, maybe 17, emerged from the storeroom and started pulling bags. Tyler moved to help him. Clara stayed near Ridge, aware that Crow's attention had shifted back to her. You're the one who was working at Marlene's place, Crow said. Heard you came to town with nothing. Running from something, people say. People say a lot of things, Clara replied evenly.
They do. Usually there's truth in it. Crow leaned against the counter. You know what else they say? They say Ridge Callahan is so desperate for help he'll hire anyone, even someone who's clearly not suited for ranch work. Clara felt heat creep up her neck but kept her voice level. I'm doing the work fine. Are you? Because I've seen ranch hands come and go from that place. Tough men, experienced men. They don't last. What makes you think you will? Maybe I'm tougher than I look.
Crow laughed, a short, dismissive sound.
Honey, you don't look tough at all. You look like someone who's going to get hurt up there. Or worse. And when that happens, when Ridge has to deal with whatever mess you create, that's when he'll finally admit he can't handle that ranch alone. Ridge stepped forward, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous.
We done here? Almost. Crow straightened. I'm making you an offer, Ridge, same one I've made before, but I'm feeling generous. $200,000 for your water rights in the upper range. You keep the lower valley, the buildings, enough to run a small operation. You get out from under whatever debt you're carrying, and you don't have to pretend you can handle that place anymore. Not interested.
You should be. Because next spring, when the snowmelt comes and you're dealing with runoff and flooding and all the problems that come with it, you're going to wish you'd taken my money, especially when I'm the only one offering.
Ridge pulled out his wallet. How much for the supplies? Crow named a figure that made Tyler stop loading and look over sharply. Boss, that's twice what... I know what it is. Ridge counted out bills. But we need the supplies, and this is the only place to get them. Smart man. Crow took the money. You change your mind about my offer, you know where to find me. Ridge didn't answer. He just helped Tyler finish loading the truck, working in tight, angry silence. Clara grabbed the lighter items, ignoring Crow's eyes on her, ignoring the way he watched like he was calculating exactly how to use her presence against Ridge. They loaded everything and got back in the truck. Ridge started the engine but didn't pull out immediately. He just sat there, hands on the wheel, jaw working. He's gonna push, Tyler said from the back. He smells blood. Let him push. Ridge put the truck in gear. I've been dealing with Silas Crow for 10 years. He's not getting my land. They drove to the hardware store next. Different owner, a weathered woman in her 70s who looked at Ridge with something approaching pity but didn't overcharge him. She nodded at Clara without comment, which felt like a victory. Then to the general store. Ruth was behind the counter, same as before. She looked Clara over with that same assessing stare. Heard you were still up at Callahan's place, Ruth said. Surprised you made it this long. Me too, Clara said honestly. That got almost a smile. You need anything specific? Clara bought new gloves, her old ones were falling apart, and wool socks and jerky and basic supplies. Ruth rang it up without commentary, which Clara appreciated more than the woman probably knew. You watch yourself up there, Ruth said as Clara left. Winter's coming in hard this year. Gets people trapped. Gets people hurt. It wasn't quite concerned, but it was close enough. Outside, Tyler was talking to a group of younger guys Clara vaguely recognized from the diner. They were laughing about something, easy and relaxed. Tyler saw Clara and waved her over. Clara, this is Marcus and Jake. They run the ski resort over in Bridger Falls. Marcus, tall, athletic, the kind of good-looking that probably got him a lot of attention, extended his hand. Tyler says you're working Ridge's ranch. That's hardcore. Clara shook his hand. It's work. More than work. That place eats people. Marcus grinned. You must be tough. Before Clara could respond, Jake, shorter, stockier, with a scar across his eyebrow, said, Saw you ride in with Ridge. He's still being an asshole about selling to Crow? Tyler's easy expression hardened. Ridge's business is his business. Hey, just asking. Everyone knows Crow's gonna win eventually. Ridge is bleeding money up there. Stubborn bastard just won't admit it. You don't know what you're talking about, Tyler said. Don't I? My uncle works at the bank. Says Callahan's behind on payments. Says one bad season and the whole operation collapses. Jake looked at Clara. You might want to find other work before that happens. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Part anger, part protectiveness for Ridge, part fear that maybe they were right. Thanks for the concern, but I'm good. Your funeral. Jake shrugged and walked away. Marcus followed with an apologetic look. Tyler waited until they were gone, then sighed. Don't listen to them. They don't know shit. Is it true? Clara asked. About the money? Tyler wouldn't meet her eyes. Ridge don't talk about finances, but it's been hard. Last winter was bad. Lost a lot of cattle. And before that, there was the drought. And medical bills from when Kincaid got hurt. It adds up. Clara thought about Crow's offer. $200,000. That was real money. Enough to solve problems. Enough to survive. Why won't he sell? She asked. Because that land's been in his family for 3 generations. Because his wife and daughter are buried up in the high meadow where she wanted to be. Because selling to Crow means admitting he failed, and Ridge would rather die than admit that. Tyler met her eyes. And because if Crow gets those water rights, he'll control everything, every ranch downstream, every small operation that depends on that creek. Crow don't want the land for ranching. He wants it for development, tourism, turn the whole valley into some rich people's playground. Sure, sant. Clara looked back toward the feed store where Ridge was loading the last of the supplies. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his jaw. Saw a man carrying weight no one else could see. She understood that. Had been that person, carrying invisible weight, refusing to break under it. We should get back, Tyler said. Still got a lot to load. They met Ridge at the truck. He'd added veterinary supplies and fencing materials and a dozen other things Clara didn't recognize. The truck bed was packed full, riding low on its suspension. That everything? Tyler asked. For now. Ridge climbed into the driver's seat. Let's go before this weather turns worse. They were pulling out when Sheriff Hayward stepped into the street, forcing Ridge to stop. The sheriff walked to the driver's window, moving with the kind of deliberate slowness that said he had all the power here and wanted everyone to know it. Ridge rolled down the window. Sheriff. Ridge, heard you were in town. Hayward's eyes moved past Ridge to Clara. Miss Boone, still working up at the ranch? Yes, sir. Huh, that's something. Hayward rested his hand on the doorframe. Ridge, I've been getting calls, people concerned about your operation, safety concerns. What kind of safety concerns? The kind where you're running a skeleton crew through winter conditions with inexperienced help. Hayward looked pointedly at Clara. Someone gets hurt up there. That's on you. Ridge's voice stayed flat, controlled. Everyone on my ranch is capable and properly trained. That right? Because I also heard Silas Crow made you a fair offer for that upper range. Seems like it might be smart to take it. Reduce your liability. Is that legal advice or personal opinion? Friendly advice from someone who'd hate to see anyone get hurt. Ridge held the sheriff's stare. We're good. Anything else? Hayward straightened, stepping back. Just be careful up there. Winter's unpredictable. Accidents happen. He walked away. Ridge didn't say anything, just rolled up the window and drove. They were out of town before Tyler spoke. That was a threat. I know what it was. Hayward's in Crow's pocket. Everyone knows it. I know that too. Ridge's hands were tight on the wheel. Doesn't change anything. Clara stared out the window at the snow-covered landscape rolling past. She was starting to understand the shape of things, Crow pushing from one side, the sheriff from another, the town waiting to see Ridge fail. And she'd walked right into the middle of it, become another pressure point whether she wanted to be or not. The thought should have scared her, should have made her want to run again. Instead, it made her angry. She'd spent her whole life being treated like a weakness, like something people could exploit or discard. Derek had seen her that way. Her father probably. Even her mother in her own way, treating Clara like a burden she had to bear. But Ridge hadn't. He'd hired her because she could work, trusted her because she'd proven herself. He didn't care what she looked like or what people said. And now those same people were trying to use her against him. Screw that. What do you need? Clara asked. Ridge glanced at her. What? Crow's trying to force you out. The sheriff's threatening you. The whole town's betting you'll fail. What do you need to prove them wrong? Ridge was quiet for a long moment. I need to survive winter without losing more cattle. Need to keep the herd healthy through spring calving. Need to get through one season without something going catastrophically wrong. He paused. And I need people I can count on. That's harder to find than money. You can count on me, Clara said. Tyler leaned forward from the back seat. Me too. You know that. Ridge nodded slowly, something easing in his expression. Not quite hope, but close. Yeah, I do. They drove back to the ranch through steadily worsening weather. Snow fell thick and heavy now, reducing visibility to maybe 50 feet. The road disappeared under white, only Ridge's memory and experience keeping them on track. By the time they reached the ranch, it was full storm. Wind howled across the valley, driving snow sideways. They unloaded as fast as they could, carrying supplies through drifts already knee-deep, faces stinging from ice crystals. Kincaid met them at the barn. Storm came in faster than predicted, got the herd moved to the lower shelter, but it's going to be a rough night. Temperatures dropping fast. How fast? Ridge asked. Below zero by midnight, maybe lower. Ridge looked at the sky, at the wall of white consuming the mountain. Everyone stays close to the main buildings tonight. No one goes anywhere alone. We've got heat and supplies. Weather breaks, we'll assess damage. They spent the evening preparing, making sure the wood stoves were stocked, water was accessible, animals were sheltered. Clara helped Kincaid move hay bales to the lower barn where the horses were stabled, her body already protesting from the morning's work. You did good in town, Kincaid said as they worked. Heard Tyler talking. Said you handled Crow better than most. I didn't do anything. That's the point. You didn't rise to the bait, didn't give him ammunition. That takes discipline. Kincaid heaved another bale onto the stack. Bryce was wrong about you. Took him longer to figure it out than the rest of us, but he knows it now. Clara glanced toward the main house where Bryce was visible through a window, working inside. He hasn't said anything to me. He won't, not his way. But he stopped complaining about you 2 weeks ago. That's as close to an apology as you'll get. It was strange, being accepted. Clara had been so focused on surviving that she hadn't noticed when the men stopped seeing her as a problem and started seeing her as part of the crew. The shift had been gradual, earned through work and pain, and refusing to quit when they expected her to. That night, Ridge called everyone to the main house for dinner. It was the first time Clara had been inside for more than a few minutes. The interior was as sparse as she remembered. Functional furniture, no decoration except a single photograph on the mantel that Ridge had turned face down. The men moved around the kitchen with easy familiarity, pulling out plates and utensils, reheating stew that had been simmering all day. Clara stood awkwardly until Tyler handed her a bowl and pointed to the table. Sit. You're not a guest, you're crew. Start acting like it. So she sat. And when the food was served, they ate together, conversation flowing around her. Talk about the herd, about weather patterns, about equipment that needed fixing. Normal ranch talk. The kind of talk that included her now, assumed her presence, asked her opinion on things she'd learned enough to have opinions about. Outside, the storm raged. Wind hit the house in waves that made the windows rattle. Snow piled against the walls, visible in the lamplight through gaps in the curtains. This keeps up, we'll be snowed in for a week, Bryce said. He'd been drinking, they all had, passing around a bottle of whiskey that burned Clara's throat when she tried it, and his usual hostility had softened into something more contemplative. Remember the winter of 19? We got trapped here for 3 weeks. Had to airlift feed in. That was bad, Kincaid agreed. Lost power for 12 days, thought we were going to freeze to death. We came close. Ridge stared into his glass. If we hadn't had that backup generator, we would have lost everything. Tyler looked at Clara. You picked a hell of a year to start ranching. Seems like every year's a hell of a year up here, Clara said. That got a laugh. Even Bryce cracked a smile. She's not wrong, Kincaid said. This place tries to kill you 12 different ways every season. You just get used to it. Or you don't, Bryce added, and you leave. But she didn't leave, Tyler pointed out. She's still here. Bryce looked at Clara, really looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. No, she didn't leave. He raised his glass slightly. To not leaving. They drank. Clara included, feeling the warmth of the whiskey and something else. Acceptance, maybe. Belonging. The kind of thing she'd stopped looking for because wanting it only led to disappointment. But here it was anyway. Unexpected and earned and real. The conversation continued, stories flowing as the bottle emptied. Stories about previous winters, about close calls, about stupid things they'd done when they were younger. Ridge mostly listened, contributing occasionally but never dominating. Clara realized he was a man more comfortable with silence than speech, more at ease with action than words. She understood that too. Around midnight, the wind died. The sudden silence was almost startling after hours of constant noise. Ridge stood and looked out the window into darkness. Eye of the storm, he said. We've got maybe an hour before the backside hits. Everyone get some sleep. Tomorrow we dig out. They dispersed to their respective buildings, moving through snow that had drifted waist-high in places. Clara made it to the line shack and built up the fire, grateful for the warmth, for the shelter, for the simple fact of having made it through another day. She was pulling off her boots when there was a knock. Ridge stood in the doorway, snow covering his shoulders. "Got a minute?" "Yeah, come in." He stepped inside, closing the door against the cold. The shack suddenly felt very small with both of them in it. Ridge looked around, at the clean floor, at the neatly stacked firewood, at the few personal items Clara had arranged on the single shelf. "You've made this place livable," he said. "It's home, for now." Ridge was quiet for a moment, then, "I wanted to thank you for what you said in the truck, about me being able to count on you. That meant something." Clara didn't know what to say to that. "I meant it. I know, that's why it mattered." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Your wages. 3 weeks' worth. I know I said 200 a week, but you've been putting in more than full time. This is what you're owed." Clara took the envelope. It was thicker than expected. "This is too much. It's what the work is worth." Ridge moved toward the door, then paused. "Crow's not going to stop. He's going to keep pushing, keep looking for ways to force me out. And because you're here, because you're visible and vulnerable, he's going to try to use you." "Let him try." Ridge almost smiled. "You say that now. But Crow plays dirty. He'll spread rumors, turn people against you, make life difficult in ways you can't anticipate. If it gets to be too much, if you need to leave, I'll understand. No hard feelings." Clara looked at him directly. "I'm not leaving." "You don't know what you're saying." "Yeah, I do. I've spent my whole life being the thing people use to hurt other people. I'm done with that. If Crow wants to come at me, fine. But I'm not running. Not anymore." Ridge held her gaze, and something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. "You've been running a long time." It wasn't a question. Clara didn't treat it like one. "Yeah." From what? She could have lied. Should have lied. But standing in that small, warm space with snow falling outside and this hard, honest man looking at her like she mattered, the truth came out. From a man who thought he owned me, who didn't like it when I proved him wrong. Ridge nodded slowly, like that explained things he'd been wondering about. "He's still looking for you?" "Probably." "He finds you here, he'll have to go through me." Clara felt something catch in her chest. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to, but I'm not letting anyone get hurt on my land. That includes you." Ridge opened the door. Cold air rushed in. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be brutal." He left before Clara could respond, disappearing into the darkness and falling snow. Clara stood there holding the envelope, feeling the weight of it, feeling the weight of everything Ridge had just offered without quite saying. Protection. Safety. The thing she'd been running toward even when she thought she was just running away. She opened the envelope. Inside was $800, exactly what he'd promised, no more, no less. And a note in rough handwriting. "You've earned this, keep earning it, Sir." Clara tucked the money into her duffel, banked the fire, and climbed into bed. Outside, the wind picked up again, the backside of the storm hitting with renewed fury. But inside, she was warm, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something close to safe. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind that screamed like something dying, of snow that fell so thick you couldn't see 10 feet, of cold that crept through every crack and gap, no matter how many layers you wore. Clara spent those days in a blur of work, breaking ice on water troughs every 4 hours, hauling hay to shelters where cattle huddled together for warmth, checking and rechecking that nothing had collapsed under the weight of accumulating snow. By the 3rd morning, she was so exhausted she could barely think straight. Her hands were cracked and bleeding from the cold. Her face felt like raw meat. She'd stopped being able to feel her toes somewhere around day 2. But she kept working because everyone else kept working, because stopping meant things died, because this was what survival looked like on a high mountain ranch in winter. When the storm finally broke, the world was transformed. Snow lay 5 feet deep in the drifts, 3 feet on the flats. The sky was impossibly blue, the kind of blue that hurt to look at. Everything sparkled in the sunlight like someone had scattered diamonds across the entire valley. Ridge called them together outside the main house. His face was drawn, shadowed with exhaustion. None of them had escaped. "We need to assess damage. Tyler and Bryce, take the lower valley. Check fences, count cattle, look for anything that collapsed. Kincaid, you're on the equipment. Make sure the tractor still runs, check the generator, inventory what we used so we know what needs replacing. Clara, you're with me. We're checking the upper range. Bryce started to protest. Boss, the upper range is going to be impassable. You can and will. We've got cattle up there that might be trapped. We need to know. Ridge looked at each of them. Everyone stays in radio contact. You get in trouble, you call. No heroics. We clear? They nodded. Ridge handed Clara a two-way radio and a pack with emergency supplies. You know how to use one of these? Yeah. Good. Stick close, watch your footing. Snow this deep hides everything. Rocks, holes, drop-offs. You break through, you could fall 20 feet before you hit ground. They set out on foot, leading 2 horses loaded with hay and supplies. The horses struggled through the deep snow, breaking trail, their breath coming in great clouds of steam. Clara followed in Ridge's footsteps, each step an exhausting fight against snow that came up past her knees in places. The altitude made everything harder. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed. Sweat froze on her skin under her layers. But she kept moving, kept following Ridge's steady pace up the mountain. 2 hours in, they found the first problem. A section of fence had collapsed under snow and wind, creating a gap wide enough for cattle to wander through. Beyond it, tracks led toward a narrow canyon Clara vaguely remembered from the supply run weeks ago. Ridge studied the tracks. 10, maybe 12 head went through here. Could be trapped in the canyon if the snow drifted wrong. He pulled out his radio. Tyler, you copy? Static, then Tyler's voice. Copy. Go ahead. Got a fence breach on the upper range, east side. Cattle headed toward Eagle Canyon. We're going after them. Boss, that canyon's a death trap in winter. If there's been an avalanche, I know the risks, just letting you know our position. Ridge clipped the radio back to his belt and looked at Clara. This is going to be dangerous. Canyon walls funnel wind and snow. One wrong step and we're both in trouble. You want to wait here? I won't think less of you. Clara adjusted her pack. Let's go find those cattle. Something flickered in Ridge's eyes, approval maybe, or just acknowledgement. He nodded and started toward the canyon. The terrain got rougher. They had to lead the horses carefully around boulders hidden under snow, across slopes so steep Clara had to grab onto exposed rock to keep from sliding. The wind picked up as they entered the canyon, funneling through the narrow space with a sound like distant thunder. Then they heard it. Cattle, bawling in distress. Ridge moved faster, Clara struggling to keep up. They rounded a bend and found them, 11 head, trapped against a wall of snow that had avalanched down from above. The cattle were panicked, churning in the confined space, eyes rolling white. We need to dig them out, Ridge said. Get them turned around, lead them back before another slide comes down. They worked fast. Ridge used a collapsible shovel from his pack to cut through the compacted snow while Clara tried to calm the cattle, talking to them in low, steady tones that probably didn't help but made her feel like she was doing something. The work was brutal. Every shovelful of snow felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Clara's arms burned, her back screamed, but slowly, inch by inch, they carved a path through the drift. Almost there, Ridge said, breathing hard. Get ready to move them as soon as I break through. He drove the shovel forward one more time and the wall gave way, snow cascading down around them. The cattle surged forward, desperate for escape, and Clara had to jump aside to avoid being trampled. Ridge grabbed her arm, pulling her against the canyon wall as the cattle thundered past. They stood pressed together in the narrow space, both breathing hard, while 11 half-wild cows fled toward open ground. You okay? Ridge asked. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. Let's get after them before they scatter. They followed the cattle out of the canyon, herding them back toward the broken fence. The horses helped, instinctively knowing how to position themselves to keep the cattle moving the right direction. Clara just tried not to fall and to stay out of the way when the animals spooked. By the time they got the cattle through the fence and started temporary repairs with the wire and posts they'd brought, the sun was past its peak. The temperature was dropping fast. Clara's hands were so numb she could barely grip the wire cutters. Ridge worked beside her, stringing wire between posts they'd managed to hammer into frozen ground. This won't hold long term, but it'll keep them in until we can do proper repairs. When will that be? Spring, probably. Ground's too frozen now to set posts properly. He secured the last wire and stepped back, assessing their work. It'll do. They started back toward the ranch, leading the exhausted horses, moving slower now that urgency had passed. The sunset turned the snow orange and pink, beautiful in a way that felt almost cruel given how exhausted Clara was. "You did good today," Ridge said after they'd been walking in silence for 20 minutes. "A lot of people would have turned back when they saw that canyon. Didn't seem like turning back was an option. It's always an option. You just didn't take it." Ridge glanced at her. "You're tougher than I gave you credit for, and I already thought you were pretty tough." Clara didn't know how to respond to that. Compliments from Ridge were rare enough to feel significant. "Thanks." They walked on. Clara's feet hurt, her back hurt, everything hurt. But there was satisfaction in it too. The knowledge that they'd saved those cattle, that she'd contributed something real, that she'd proven herself capable one more time. They were maybe half a mile from the ranch when Ridge stopped suddenly, staring at something ahead. Clara followed his gaze and saw it, fresh tracks in the snow. Boot prints. Too large to be Tyler's or Bryce's. Someone had been here recently, walking the perimeter of the ranch property. Ridge knelt, examining the tracks closely. "These aren't ours. Someone came up here during the storm or right after it broke." "Who would do that?" "Someone who wanted to look around without being noticed." Ridge stood, his expression hardening. "Someone who wanted to see how much damage the storm did. Whether we're still operational?" "Crow? Or someone working for him?" Ridge pulled out his radio. "Kincaid, you copy?" "Go ahead." "You see anyone come onto the property in the last few hours?" "Negative. Been in the equipment barn all day. Watch out. Got fresh tracks on the northeast section. Someone's been snouting around." There was a pause. "Want me to come check it out?" "No, just keep your eyes open. Let me know if you see anything unusual." Ridge clipped the radio away and started following the tracks. They led toward the upper buildings, circled the main house at a distance, then headed back down toward the road. Whoever had made them had been thorough, checking sight lines, assessing vulnerabilities. Ridge's jaw got tighter with every step. The tracks ended at a spot where a vehicle had been parked, tire treads clear in the snow, engine oil dripped on the white surface. "They drove up during the storm," Ridge said quietly. "Knew we'd be busy, knew we wouldn't notice. This was reconnaissance." "For what?" Ridge didn't answer immediately. He stared down at the tire tracks, then at the ranch spread out below them. "For whatever Crow's planning next." They walked back to the ranch in tense silence. By the time they arrived, full dark had fallen and the temperature had dropped below zero. Tyler and Bryce were in the barn, tending to horses. Kincaid was in the equipment shed, running the generator through a maintenance cycle. Ridge called them all to the main house. Inside, with coffee brewing and the wood stove radiating heat, Ridge explained what they'd found. The men's reactions ranged from Tyler's concern to Bryce's anger to Kincaid's grim acceptance. "This is escalation," Kincaid said. "Crow's done with verbal pressure. He's moving to something else." "But what?" Tyler asked. "He can't force Ridge to sell just by trespassing." "No, but he can gather information, look for problems, weak points. Maybe he's planning to report us for safety violations, or environmental issues, or any of a dozen other things that would bring regulators down on us." Bryce slammed his coffee mug on the table. "That son of a bitch," Ridge held up a hand. "We don't know what he's planning yet. Could be he's just trying to scare us, could be more. Either way, we need to be ready." "Ready how?" Clara asked. "Document everything. Keep detailed records of our operations, cattle counts, feed usage, medical treatments, maintenance. If Crow tries to claim we're running an unsafe operation, we'll have proof otherwise, and we double-check security. No one comes onto this property without us knowing about it." "I'll set up motion sensors on the access roads," Kincaid said. "Got some old trail cameras we can use." "Good. Tyler, you and Bryce make sure all the fences are solid, all the gates are locked. Clara?" Ridge looked at her. "You're on documentation. You've got good handwriting, you're organized. Start keeping a daily log of everything we do." Clara nodded. It was make work, probably. Something to keep her involved and useful, but she understood the real message. Ridge trusted her with something important. Trusted her to be part of the defense against whatever was coming. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a new routine. Work during the day, feeding cattle, breaking ice, maintaining equipment. Documentation in the evening. Clara sitting at the main house table, writing careful entries about every aspect of ranch operations while the men played cards or repaired gear around her. The tracking cameras Kincaid set up caught nothing. No more unexplained visitors, no more signs of trespassing. But the tension didn't ease. If anything, it got worse. Waiting for the other shoe to drop. Clara had just finished the evening's documentation and was heading back to her shack when she heard raised voices from behind the barn. She recognized Bryce's angry tone, Tyler's attempting to be reasonable response. Can't just ignore it. If Crow's planning something, we need to hit back first. And do what exactly? Burn down his feed store? That'll just prove we're the problem. Better than sitting here waiting to get screwed. Clara hesitated, knowing she should probably keep walking. But curiosity won. She moved closer, staying in the shadows. Ridge has a plan, Tyler was saying. We document everything. We stay clean. We don't give Crow ammunition. Ridge's plan is getting pushed around and hoping Crow eventually gets bored. That's not a plan. That's surrender. You want to tell him that? Bryce was quiet for a moment. No, but I don't have to like it. None of us like it. But starting a war with Crow when we're barely holding on financially, that's suicide. Clara had heard enough. She started back toward her shack, but her boot crunched on frozen snow, and both men spun toward the sound. Clara? Tyler stepped into the light. How long have you been there? Just passing through. Bryce crossed his arms. You hear all that? Some of it. And? Clara considered lying, decided against it. And I think you're both right. Doing nothing feels wrong, but doing something stupid is worse. Bryce snorted. What would you do then? I'd find out what Crow's actually planning before deciding how to respond. Right now we're swinging at shadows. And how exactly do we do that? Bryce asked. Ask him nicely to share his evil plans? We could pay attention. Crow owns half the businesses in town. He talks to people. People talk to other people. Someone knows something. Tyler tilted his head. You suggesting we spy on him? I'm suggesting we listen. There's a difference. Bryce studied her for a long moment. You know, for someone who's only been here 2 months, you've got opinions. I've got eyes and ears. I use them. That actually got a laugh out of Bryce. Fair enough. He looked at Tyler. She might have a point. We've been so focused on the ranch we haven't been paying attention to what's happening in town. Ridge won't like it, Tyler said. Ridge doesn't have to know. We're just being observant. That's not the same as starting trouble. Clara could see where this was going and didn't like it. I wasn't suggesting we go behind Ridge's back. You weren't suggesting anything, Bryce said. You were just thinking out loud. We're the ones deciding to act on it. He clapped Tyler on the shoulder. Come on, let's go talk to Kincaid. See if he's still got any contacts in town worth hitting up for gossip. They walked away, leaving Clara standing in the cold, wondering if she'd just made things better or worse. She found out 3 days later. Ridge was in town meeting with the bank. Something about refinancing that had him tense and short-tempered before he left. Kincaid had gone with him for moral support. That left Clara, Tyler, and Bryce at the ranch. Clara was in the main house updating the logs when Tyler's truck pulled into the yard, moving fast. He jumped out and ran for the house, Bryce right behind him. We got a problem, Tyler said, breathing hard. Clara looked up from her work. What kind of problem? The kind where Crow's filing a complaint with the county. Claims Ridge is running an illegal operation, overgrazing, environmental damage, unsafe working conditions. Tyler pulled off his hat and ran his hand through his hair. Heard it from Marcus in town. His cousin works at the county office. Complaint was filed this morning. Clara's stomach dropped. That's what the trespassing was about. He was gathering evidence, or making it up. Doesn't matter which if the county believes him. Bryce paced the room like a caged animal. Inspectors are coming next week. They find violations, real or manufactured. They can shut us down pending remediation. That means no cattle sales, no income, nothing. Ridge won't survive that. We need to tell him, Clara said. He's in a bank meeting. Can't exactly interrupt that. Tyler checked his watch. Won't be back for another 3 hours minimum. Clara thought fast. What would the inspectors look for? Everything. Cattle health, grazing patterns, water quality, waste management, safety equipment, employee conditions. Tyler met her eyes. They'll interview us. Ask about working conditions, pay, whether Ridge follows regulations. The implication was clear. Clara was the newest employee, the most vulnerable, the one they'd assume Ridge might be exploiting. If the inspectors talked to her and she said the wrong thing, or if they decided her presence proved Ridge was desperate enough to hire unqualified workers, it could sink the whole operation. Then we make sure there's nothing to find, Clara said. We have 3 days before Ridge gets back, another 4 before the inspection. That's a week. We go through every inch of this ranch and fix anything that could possibly be a violation. That's a lot of work, Bryce said. Then we'd better get started. They worked like people possessed. Tyler printed out every relevant regulation he could find online. They went through each one systematically, checking compliance, fixing problems. Reorganized the equipment shed to meet safety standards, cleaned and cataloged veterinary supplies, documented water quality testing, repaired anything broken or potentially hazardous. Clara handled the paperwork, creating files for every animal, every maintenance record, every supply purchase. Her handwriting cramped after hours of writing, but she kept going because the alternative was giving Crow what he wanted. Kincaid and Ridge returned late that evening to find the 3 of them still working. Ridge took one look at the organized chaos and stopped. "What's going on?" Tyler explained. Ridge's expression got darker with every sentence. "How long have you known about this?" Ridge asked when Tyler finished. "Found out this afternoon. And you didn't call me?" "You were in a bank meeting. Didn't want to add more stress." Ridge was quiet for a long moment. Clara braced for anger, for accusations of going behind his back. Instead, Ridge looked at the work they'd done, the organized files, the cleaned shed, the repairs, and some of the tension left his shoulders. "You did good," he said finally. "All of you." He looked at Clara. "This was your idea. We all contributed. But you organized it. You figured out what needed doing and did it." Ridge nodded slowly. "Thank you." The inspection happened on a Tuesday. 2 county officials arrived in a white truck, carrying clipboards and cameras and an attitude that said they expected to find problems. The older one, a man in his 50s with the kind of face that suggested he'd seen every trick in the book, introduced himself as Inspector Morrison. His partner was younger, maybe 30, eager and officious. Ridge met them at the main house, professional and cold. "Gentlemen, I understand you're here about a complaint." "That's right. We've received allegations of regulatory violations. We're here to investigate." Morrison handed Ridge a paper. "This details what we'll be inspecting. You have the right to have legal representation present." "Don't need a lawyer, got nothing to hide." Ridge gestured toward the ranch. "Where do you want to start?" They started with the cattle. Morrison and his partner walked the pastures, checking the herd's condition, counting animals, taking notes. Clara watched from a distance, heart pounding, waiting for them to find something wrong. They didn't. The cattle were healthy, well-fed, spread appropriately across the available grazing land. Next was the water supply. They tested the creek, checked runoff patterns, examined how Ridge managed waste. Again, nothing wrong. Kincaid's quick work installing better drainage had paid off. Then the equipment and buildings. Safety gear properly stored, maintenance records up to date. No hazards that couldn't be explained and justified. Finally, they interviewed the workers. Morrison talked to each of them separately. Tyler first, then Bryce, then Kincaid. Clara watched them emerge from the interviews looking tense but relieved. Whatever they'd been asked, they'd answered correctly. Then it was her turn. Morrison gestured for her to sit across from him at the main house table. His partner stood nearby, taking notes. "Miss Boone, how long have you worked here?" "About 2 months." "And what's your role?" "General ranch work, cattle handling, maintenance, whatever needs doing." "Did you have ranch experience before starting here?" "No." Morrison made a note. "So Ridge Callahan hired you with no relevant experience?" Clara saw the trap. Admitting she was unqualified could support claims of desperation or poor judgment, but lying would be worse. "He hired me because I could learn and I was willing to work. I've been trained properly since starting." "By who?" "Ridge and the other hands. They've taught me what I need to know to do the job safely." "Have you ever felt unsafe while working here?" "No." "Have you ever been asked to do something beyond your capabilities?" "I've been challenged. That's different from unsafe." Morrison studied her. "Miss Boone, I need you to understand something. If Mr. Callahan is exploiting workers, putting you in dangerous situations, not providing proper training or equipment,
You can tell me. There won't be repercussions. Clara met his eyes steadily. Ridge runs a good operation. He doesn't ask anyone to do anything he wouldn't do himself. The work is hard because ranch work is hard, especially in winter, but it's not unsafe and I'm not being exploited. You're sure about that? Completely sure. Morrison made more notes, then nodded. All right, thank you for your time. Clara left the interview feeling shaky, but certain she'd said the right things. She found Ridge outside, watching the inspectors examine the fence line. How'd it go? He asked quietly. I told them the truth, that you run a good operation, and I'm not being mistreated. Ridge nodded, not taking his eyes off the inspectors. Thank you. They waited. The inspectors conferred, made more notes, took more pictures. The sun moved across the sky. Clara's anxiety ratcheted higher with every passing minute. Finally, Morrison approached Ridge. Mr. Callahan, we've completed our inspection. And while we did find a few minor items that need attention, some fencing that should be reinforced, a couple of maintenance logs that need updating, we found no evidence of the violations alleged in the complaint. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Furthermore, Morrison continued, the operation appears to be well managed and in compliance with relevant regulations. We'll be filing our report with the county. The complaint will be noted as unsubstantiated. Ridge's expression didn't change, but Clara saw his hands relax slightly. Appreciate your thoroughness. Morrison hesitated. Off the record? We see this sometimes. Someone files a complaint hoping to cause trouble for a competitor. Doesn't usually work. Good luck, Mr. Callahan. They left. Ridge watched until their truck disappeared down the road, then turned to face Clara and the men who'd gathered nearby. We won, Tyler said, grinning. We actually won. We survived, Ridge corrected. That's not the same as winning. Crow will try something else. Let him try, Bryce said. We beat him once. We'll beat him again. Ridge looked at each of them. Tyler, Bryce, Kincaid, Clara. You all did good. Real good. Without the prep work, without the documentation, this could have gone differently. His eyes settled on Clara. You especially. You gave them nothing to use against us. Clara shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Just told the truth? Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do. Ridge pulled out his wallet and counted out bills. Everyone's getting a bonus this week. You earned it. That night, they celebrated quietly in the main house. Nothing elaborate, just whiskey and the satisfaction of having beaten back one more attempt to break them. Clara sat among the men, listening to their stories, their laughter, feeling like she'd finally found something she'd been looking for without knowing what it was. A place where she mattered, a place where she belonged. Ridge caught her eye across the table and raised his glass slightly. Clara raised hers in return, understanding passing between them without words. They'd survived this round, but both of them knew Crow wasn't done, and whatever came next would be worse. The fire came 3 weeks later on a night when the wind screamed down from the peaks, like it was trying to tear the world apart. Clara woke to the smell of smoke. Not wood smoke from a stove, but something sharper, more acrid. She was out of bed and pulling on boots before her brain fully caught up, instinct overriding thought. Outside, the wind hit her like a physical blow, and there, on the lower ridge where they'd moved the main herd for winter grazing, she saw it. Orange light, flickering, spreading, too bright to be anything but fire. She ran for the main house, pounding on the door. Ridge opened it already half-dressed, eyes going immediately to where she was pointing. "Wake everyone," he said, voice sharp and controlled. "Now." Within minutes, they were all there. Tyler stumbling out with his boots unlaced, Bryce carrying a rifle like he expected to shoot the fire, Kincaid already assessing wind direction and speed with the practiced eye of someone who'd fought this battle before. "It's between us and the herd," Kincaid said. "Wind's pushing it upslope toward the winter shelter. We've got maybe an hour before it reaches them." "How'd it start?" Tyler asked. "We haven't had lightning. There's snow on the ground." "It didn't start naturally." Ridge's voice was flat, certain. "Look at the pattern. 3 separate burn points all along the fence line. Someone set this." Clara felt ice in her stomach that had nothing to do with the cold. "Crow, probably. Doesn't matter right now." Ridge was already moving toward the barn. "We need to get the herd out before they're trapped. Tyler, you and Bryce saddle horses. Kincaid, get the truck loaded with shovels and water tanks. Clara, I'm going with you," she said before he could finish.
Ridge looked at her, seemed about to argue, then nodded. Saddle Rosie. Meet us at the south gate in 5 minutes. They moved. Clara's hands shook as she saddled the mare, fumbling with straps she could usually manage in her sleep. The smell of smoke was getting stronger. Through the barn door, she could see the fire spreading, bright against the darkness, eating through dry grass that the snow hadn't covered. Ridge appeared beside her, leading his gray gelding. You don't have to do this. Could stay here, help Kincaid with the water. You need everyone you've got. I need everyone alive. That fire gets between us and escape. We're dead. You understand that? Clara pulled the cinch tight. I understand. Ridge studied her face, then handed her a bandana. Cover your mouth and nose. Smoke will get you before the fire does if you're not careful. They rode out into hell. The wind was stronger on the open slope, driving embers ahead of the main fire, starting new burns in random patches. The horses fought the bits, wanting to run from the danger their instincts screamed about. Clara held Rosie steady through sheer force of will, following Ridge's lead toward where the cattle should be. They found them bunched against the winter shelter's fence, bawling in terror, churning in circles as the fire advanced from 3 sides. Smoke was already thick enough to make visibility patchy. Clara's eyes burned. Her throat felt raw. We've got to turn them, Ridge shouted over the wind. Push them north, toward the gap in the ridge. It's the only clear path. Tyler and Bryce appeared from the smoke like ghosts, their horses wild-eyed but controlled. They spread out, forming a loose line to funnel the cattle toward the escape route Ridge had identified. But the cattle weren't cooperating. Panicked animals didn't think, didn't follow logic. They just ran, breaking in every direction, making the situation worse with every second. Clara watched Ridge trying to turn the main group, watched Tyler and Bryce fighting to control the flanks, watched the fire getting closer. The wind shifted slightly, and suddenly flames were racing up a draw to their left, faster than a horse could run, cutting off part of their escape route. That's when Clara saw it. There was another path, narrower, steeper, running along the base of the ridge through a series of rock corridors she'd noticed during one of their winter patrols. She'd studied it because it looked interesting, different, the kind of route that would be suicide in good conditions but might, just might, work when everything else was burning. She pulled Rosie around and rode straight into the smoke. Clara! Ridge's voice behind her, sharp with alarm. What are you doing? She didn't answer, didn't have breath to spare. She pushed Rosie toward the cattle that had broken off from the main group, the ones everyone else had given up on. Maybe 30 head, running blind, heading straight toward a box canyon that would trap them against the fire. Clara got ahead of them, turned Rosie broadside across their path, and started yelling, screaming, really, making as much noise as she could. The lead steer tried to dodge around her. She cut it off, forced it to turn, forced it toward the narrow gap in the rocks she'd spotted. The steer fought her. Rosie fought the steer. Clara fought them both, using every trick she'd learned, every bit of understanding she'd gained about how cattle moved and thought and responded to pressure. The steer turned, the others followed. Clara pushed them into the gap, through the narrow corridor where rock walls pressed close on both sides. Behind her, she could hear Ridge shouting something, but the words were lost in wind and fire and the thunder of hooves on stone. The corridor twisted. The cattle balked at the darkness, at the tight quarters. Clara kept pushing, kept driving them forward, because going back meant death and going forward meant maybe, possibly, surviving. Embers fell around them. One landed on Clara's shoulder and she slapped it out without thinking, feeling the burn through her jacket. The smoke was so thick now she could barely see Rosie's ears. Her lungs felt like they were being scraped raw with every breath. But the cattle were moving. Through the corridor into a wider section, then up a steep slope that made Rosie scramble and slide, but somehow, impossibly, kept climbing. And then they were out on the far side of the ridge, in an area the fire hadn't reached yet, with clean air and open ground, and the cattle scattering into the darkness, but alive, running free instead of trapped and burning. Clara pulled Rosie to a stop and just breathed. Her whole body shook. Her face felt burned, her lungs raw. She could taste blood in her mouth from breathing smoke. Hoofbeats behind her. Ridge emerged from the corridor, his face black with soot, eyes wild. When he saw her sitting there on Rosie, alive and mostly intact, something in his expression broke and reformed into something she couldn't quite name. "You insane woman," he said, voice rough. "You absolutely insane woman." Did the others make it? Tyler and Bryce got the main herd through the north gap, Kincaid setting backfires to protect the buildings. Ridge rode closer, reached out like he might touch her, then pulled back. You just rode into smoke so thick I couldn't see you. Through a passage I didn't know existed, with 30 head of terrified cattle. Someone had to. It should have been me. You were busy with the main herd. Ridge stared at her. You saved them. Those 30 head. They'd be dead right now if you hadn't done that. Clara looked back at the gap in the ridge, at the smoke still pouring through it, at the orange glow of fire beyond. How bad is it? Bad. We lost the winter shelter, probably lost a section of fence, but the main herd's safe. The buildings are safe, because of quick action and some borderline suicidal heroics. Ridge's eyes were steady on hers. You could have died. So could you. That's different. This is my ranch. My responsibility. It's my home too, Clara said quietly. My responsibility too. Something shifted in Ridge's expression, recognition, maybe, or acceptance of a truth he'd been avoiding. He opened his mouth to respond, but Tyler's voice crackled over the radio. Boss, we got a problem. Fire jumped the creek on the east side. It's heading toward Crow's property. Ridge grabbed his radio. How fast? Fast. Wind's pushing it. Could reach his fence line in 20 minutes. Ridge closed his eyes briefly, and Clara saw him make a decision. We're going to stop it. Boss, it's Crow's land. Let it burn. Can't do that. Fire doesn't care about property lines. It reaches his land, it could spread to the whole valley. We stop it now, or everyone loses everything. Ridge keyed the radio again. Kincaid, how much water we got? 2 tanks on the truck. Not enough for what you're thinking. It'll have to be. Meet us at the east boundary. Tyler, Bryce, get those cattle settled and then join us. We've got a fire to fight. They rode hard across the dark landscape, racing the flames. Claire's body screamed protest. She'd been awake for hours, had already pushed herself beyond normal limits, and now Ridge was asking for more. But she kept going because stopping wasn't an option. They met Kincaid at the boundary. The fire was visible in the distance, a line of orange eating its way across the slope. Ridge assessed it with quick, experienced eyes. We can't stop it all, but we can slow it here, use the terrain. He pointed to a rocky outcrop. Natural fire break. We set a backfire from there, burn out the fuel between us and the main fire. When they meet, there's nothing left to burn. That's going to take perfect timing, Kincaid said. Get it wrong and we just make it worse. Then we don't get it wrong. Ridge looked at each of them. This is dangerous. Fire's unpredictable. Wind changes. We could get caught. Anyone wants out, say so now. No one spoke. All right then, let's get to work. They fought the fire for hours. Clara had never known exhaustion like this. Working in smoke that choked every breath, heat that felt like it was cooking her from the inside, constantly moving to stay ahead of flames that seemed to have intelligence and malice. They dug fire breaks with shovels until their hands bled. They set backfires and prayed they'd calculated correctly. They beat out spot fires with wet sacks until their arms went numb. And slowly, impossibly, they won. The backfire met the main fire and both starved for fuel. The wind shifted slightly, pushing flames away from Crow's property line. By the time the sun came up, the fire was contained, smoldering but no longer spreading. They stood in the gray dawn light, covered in soot and ash, barely able to stand. Claire's legs shook. Her lungs felt destroyed. But she was alive. They were all alive. And Crow's property, the land he'd been trying to steal from Ridge for years, was untouched. Ridge pulled out his phone, dialed a number, put it on speaker. It rang 3 times before Crow answered. Callahan, a bit early for a social call. There was a fire last night. Started on my land, spread toward yours. We stopped it before it reached your property. Silence on the other end. Then, I heard about the fire. Heard it started in 3 places. Heard you lost your winter shelter. That's right. Arson's a serious crime. It is. More silence. Clara could almost hear Crow calculating, trying to figure out Ridge's angle. Why are you telling me this? Crow asked finally. Because I want you to understand something. You set that fire, or you hired someone to set it, thinking it would break me. Force me to sell. Instead, it proved something. Ridge's voice was hard and clear. It proved I'd rather save your land, your property, than let a fire destroy the valley.
even knowing what you've done, even knowing you'll probably try something else. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, you do, and so do the sheriff's investigators who are going to look at those burn patterns and figure out it was arson. And so will everyone in town who hears that the Callahan crew spent all night protecting Crow's property while their own buildings burned. Ridge paused. You wanted to make me look weak. You made yourself look like the villain. Good luck coming back from that. He hung up. Tyler started laughing, a tired, slightly hysterical sound. You just declared war. No, I ended one. Ridge looked at the smoldering landscape, at the blackened ground and destroyed fencing and the winter shelter that was now just charred timbers. Crow can't touch us now. Not after this. Town's already suspicious of him. Now they'll know for sure. You can't prove he set the fire, Bryce said. Don't have to. Everyone knows he did. And everyone knows we saved his land anyway. That's worth more than proof. Kincaid nodded slowly. Smart. Real smart. It's the truth. That's all. Ridge turned to face them. We lost infrastructure, but we saved the herd. That's what matters. Buildings can be rebuilt. Fences can be replaced. Long as we've got the cattle and the land, we can survive. And each other, Tyler added quietly. We survived because we had each other. Ridge's eyes moved to Clara, standing slightly apart, still catching her breath. Yeah, we did. The days that followed were chaos. Sheriff's investigators came, confirmed arson, couldn't prove who'd done it, but everyone knew. The story spread through Black Hollow and beyond, how Ridge's crew had fought all night to save the valley, how they'd protected even Crow's land. Public opinion shifted overnight. Suddenly, Ridge wasn't the stubborn rancher refusing reasonable offers. He was the man who'd put the valley's safety above personal grudges. Crow went from respected businessman to suspected arsonist. People crossed the street to avoid him. His businesses got quieter. The bank called Ridge in. Clara didn't know what was said, but Ridge came back with news that they were extending his loan terms, giving him breathing room to rebuild. Donations started arriving, lumber, fencing materials, offers of help from other ranchers who respected what he'd done. Through it all, they worked. Clearing debris, planning reconstruction, caring for the herd. The rhythm of ranch life continued because it had to, because survival didn't pause for recovery. Clara was checking cattle in the lower valley one afternoon when she heard a vehicle approaching. She tensed, hand automatically going to the radio on her belt, but it was just a truck she didn't recognize. It parked near the main house, and a woman got out, mid-30s, professional-looking, carrying a briefcase. Clara rode closer, curious. Ridge emerged from the house to meet the woman. They talked for a few minutes, then Ridge called out, "Clara, need you here." She dismounted and approached, wondering what this was about. "This is Sarah Chen," Ridge said. "She's a lawyer from Bridger Falls, says she's got information about Crow." Sarah extended her hand. "Ms. Boone, I've heard about your role in fighting the fire. Impressive." Clara shook her hand, confused. "Thank you. I represent several small businesses in the area. Businesses that Silas Crow has been, let's say, aggressively trying to acquire. The fire incident gave some of my clients the courage to come forward about his practices. Intimidation, unfair dealing, possibly fraud." Sarah pulled papers from her briefcase. "We're building a case, but we need people willing to testify about his behavior. Mr. Callahan has agreed. I'm hoping you might as well." Clara looked at Ridge. He nodded slightly. "She's legitimate. I checked." "What would I testify about?" Clara asked. "The conversation in his store, the threats, the implications, the pattern of harassment." Sarah met her eyes. "I won't lie to you. This could get difficult. Crow has resources and he'll fight back. But with enough people standing together, we can stop him from doing to others what he tried to do to this ranch." Clara thought about the moment in the feed store, Crow's assessment of her, his casual cruelty. Thought about the fire, the risk to everyone she'd come to care about. Thought about running versus standing. "I'll testify," she said. Sarah smiled. "Thank you. I'll be in touch." After she left, Ridge and Clara stood in the yard watching dust settle from her departure. "You didn't have to agree," Ridge said. "This is my fight." "No, it's not. It stopped being just your fight when he set that fire, when he tried to hurt all of us." Clara looked at the rebuilt fence line, at the temporary shelter they'd erected for equipment. "I'm tired of running from bullies. Time to stand." Ridge was quiet for a moment, then, "You've changed since you got here, gotten stronger." "I was always strong. Just didn't know it yet." Clara paused. "You helped me figure that out. You and this place and this work. Showed me I could survive more than I thought. You did that yourself. I just gave you the opportunity. Sometimes that's enough." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun move toward the western peaks. After a while, Ridge spoke again. "I've been thinking about the future of this place, about what happens if I can't run it alone anymore." He glanced at her. "You ever think about staying, long term?" Clara's heart did something complicated. "I don't know. Haven't let myself think that far ahead." "Maybe you should." Ridge turned to face her fully. "You've earned a place here, not just as hired help, as a partner, if you want it. Equal share in the operation, equal say in decisions. I can't pay much right now, but when things stabilize—" "Ridge," Clara stopped him. "Why?" "Because you saved 30 head of cattle when no one else could. Because you fought a fire to protect land that isn't even yours. Because you're willing to testify against a dangerous man." He paused. "Because you see this place the way I do, not just as property or profit, but as something worth fighting for." Clara felt tears threaten and forced them back. "I need to think about it." "Take your time. Offer stands." Ridge headed toward the barn, then paused. "For what it's worth, I hope you stay. Place is better with you in it." He left her standing there, mind spinning, heart uncertain. That night, Clara sat in her line shack, warmer now with the improvements she'd made, and thought about the question Ridge had asked. Did she want to stay? 3 months ago, she'd been running. Terrified, desperate, convinced she'd never be safe anywhere. She'd come to Black Hollow expecting nothing except maybe a place to hide for a while before moving on again. Instead, she'd found work that mattered. People who respected her. A place that demanded everything she had and gave back purpose in return. She thought about Derek, about the man she'd fled from. He felt distant now, less real, like something from someone else's life. She'd been so afraid of him finding her that she'd stopped thinking about whether she wanted to be found. Maybe it was time to stop running from that too. She pulled out her phone, the new one she'd bought, the one Derek didn't know about, and did something she'd been avoiding for months. She searched for news from her old city. It took 15 minutes to find it. A brief article, 3 weeks old. Local man arrested on assault charges after victim comes forward. Derek's name. Derek's face in a mugshot, looking nothing like the charming man she'd fallen for. The victim wasn't Clara. It was someone else. Someone he'd moved on to after Clara disappeared. Someone who'd fought back and pressed charges and made it stick. Clara read the article twice, then a third time, letting it sink in. Derek was locked up, facing trial. Even if he got out, he'd be on probation, monitored, unable to just disappear and hunt down an ex. She was safe, not because she'd run far enough or hidden well enough, but because someone else had been brave enough to stand up. Someone else had done what Clara had been too afraid to do. And now Clara had a choice. Keep running out of habit, out of fear of what might happen, or stop. Plant roots. Build something instead of just surviving. She knew which one she wanted. The next morning, she found Ridge in the barn, repairing tack. "I'll stay," she said without preamble. "Your offer, partnership, I accept." Ridge looked up from the bridle he was mending. "You sure?" "Completely sure." He set down his work and extended his hand. "Then welcome home, partner." Clara shook his hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own, and smiled. "Home. Yeah, I like the sound of that." The legal case against Crow took months to build. Clara testified about the conversation in the feed store, about the pattern of intimidation. Others testified about worse, threats, extortion, business deals made under duress. The weight of evidence became impossible to ignore. Crow tried to fight it, hired expensive lawyers, made counter-accusations. But the fire had turned public opinion against him too strongly. When the trial finally happened, it took the jury 3 hours to find him guilty of multiple counts of fraud and criminal intimidation. He lost his businesses, lost his property, lost everything he'd spent years building through manipulation and fear. Clara didn't feel triumphant watching him led away, just tired and relieved it was over. Spring came to the high country slowly, snow melting in patches, revealing winter-killed grass that would green up once the ground thawed. The ranch began its yearly cycle again, preparing for calving season, repairing winter damage,
planning for the work ahead. The new winter shelter was better than the old one, sturdier, with proper ventilation and drainage. They'd built it together, all 5 of them, along with volunteers from town who showed up with tools and labor and quiet apologies for judging Ridge too harshly. Black Hollow was different now. Friendlier. Ruth still ran her general store with the same sharp efficiency, but she smiled at Clara now, asked how the ranch was doing. Marlene hired Clara's old room out to a college kid working summer construction and told Clara she'd kept her job open for a month before accepting she wasn't coming back. Sheriff Hayward had been quietly encouraged to retire early, and his replacement actually seemed interested in law over politics. One evening in late April, as the sun painted the peaks orange and gold, Clara stood on the ridge above the ranch and looked down at everything she'd helped build. The new shelter, the repaired fences, the healthy cattle grazing in meadows finally free of snow. Smoke rose from the main house chimney. She could see Tyler working in the corral, Kincaid checking the water system, Bryce, surprisingly, playing with a dog they'd rescued from town, and Ridge standing by the barn, looking up at the mountains like he was reading a language only he understood. Clara had come here broken, running, convinced she was nothing more than what other people decided she was. She'd been wrong. She wasn't weak because of how she looked or where she'd come from or what she'd survived. She was strong because she'd survived it. Because she'd taken everything the mountain and the work and the winter could throw at her, and she'd endured. She'd proven she could stand when everyone expected her to fall. That was the truth no one could take away. Ridge saw her on the ridge and raised his hand in greeting. Clara waved back, then started down the slope toward home, toward the people who'd become family, toward the work that gave her purpose, toward the life she'd built from nothing but determination and refusal to quit. The wind moved across the valley, carrying the smell of pine and thawing earth and possibility. Clara breathed it in and smiled. She'd come here to survive. She'd stayed to live, and that made all the difference.